You've been lied to about why you feel stuck in life. They told you it comes from bad luck, from the wrong timing, from not finding the right path yet. But if that were true, why do people who finally reach their goals still feel empty? Why do you still feel trapped, even when nothing is physically stopping you? The truth is, feeling stuck is not about your circumstances. It's about attachment. And Buddhism has been revealing this hidden cause for over 2,000 years. The Buddha taught that what holds a life in place is not failure, not confusion, not the world, but the mind clinging to what is familiar, to what feels safe, to the story of who you think you are, even when it quietly keeps you from moving forward. Tonight, as you listen to this Buddhist perspective on attachment, something inside you will begin to loosen. You may not notice it immediately, but the heaviness you've been carrying will start to lift. The endless thinking will slow down, and a quiet clarity will take its place. You'll begin to see that the prison was never outside you, and that the door has always been within reach. And when you wake up tomorrow, life may look the same, but you will feel different, calmer, clearer, less pulled by fears and habits that once kept you frozen. This is not just another explanation about why life feels hard. This is an awakening to the invisible chains of attachment and the freedom that appears when you finally see them. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something inside you already knows this is not just about circumstances. You can feel it in quiet moments, in that strange tension between the life you are living and the life you sense is possible. You have tried to change habits, change environments, change goals, yet the same invisible ceiling keeps meeting you. That is why we have to go deeper, past surface problems, into the one attachment that quietly shapes every decision you make, the story you believe about who you are. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from feeling trapped in your own life while appearing free on the outside. It is the pain of knowing you could be more, do more, become different, yet something inside refuses to move. Not because the door is locked, but because the person holding the key believes they are not allowed to open it. This is where identity clinging lives. It does not shout. It whispers. It does not feel like a prison. It feels like truth. From the moment you were a child, people began handing you descriptions of yourself. Some were kind, some were careless, some were said in anger, some were repeated so often they hardened into facts. You were told you are shy or difficult, or the responsible one, or the quiet one, or the smart one, or the one who never finishes what they start. At first, these were just comments floating in the air. Over time, they sank into your mind and formed a script. Eventually, you stopped hearing them as opinions and started hearing them as reality. The mind likes certainty more than freedom. Certainty feels safe. So once a story forms, the mind protects it, even if the story hurts you. If you believe you are someone who always fails, you may unconsciously avoid situations where success is possible, because success would destroy the identity you have learned to live inside. If you believe you are someone who must always be strong, you may refuse help even when you are exhausted, because accepting support would threaten the image you maintain. In this way, identity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Buddhist teaching calls this Sakkayaditthi, the view that there is a solid, permanent self behind your experiences. It is the belief that there is a fixed me who must remain consistent. But if you look closely, everything about you is changing constantly. Your body changes, your thoughts change, your preferences change. Even your memories change as they are recalled and retold. Yet the mind clings to the idea of a stable character because it fears the uncertainty of fluidity. This is why clinging to identity freezes growth. Growth requires contradiction. It requires you to act in ways that the old version of you would not recognize. But if you are loyal to a rigid self-image, you will reject anything that does not match it. You might want confidence, but if you are attached to the identity of being insecure, you will sabotage opportunities to speak up. You might want peace, but if you are attached to the identity of being wronged, you will keep replaying the pain because it confirms who you believe you are. Notice how often people introduce themselves through limitations. They say, "I'm bad at relationships," or "I'm just not disciplined," or "I've always been like this." These statements sound harmless, but they are chains disguised as honesty. Each time you repeat them, you reinforce the walls of the prison. The mind stops exploring possibilities because it believes the case is already closed. Identity clinging also feeds comparison. When you measure yourself against others, you are not just evaluating your progress. You are protecting a narrative. If someone else succeeds in a way that contradicts your story about what is possible for you, it creates discomfort. Instead of expanding your sense of possibility, the mind may dismiss their success or retreat into excuses. This keeps the identity intact, but it keeps you small. There is also a strange comfort in familiar roles, even painful ones. If you have always been the caretaker, you may feel lost when there is no one to rescue. If you have always been the underdog, success might feel disorienting because it removes the identity that once defined you. So the mind quietly recreates situations that keep the story alive, not because it wants suffering, but because it wants continuity. This is why circumstances alone rarely free a person. Someone can change jobs, cities, relationships, even countries, yet carry the same invisible patterns everywhere they go. They have moved physically, but not psychologically. The prison traveled with them because it was built from beliefs, not walls. The narrative around the self also distorts memory. The mind edits the past to support the identity it wants to maintain. It highlights events that confirm the story and ignores those that contradict it. Over time, the edited version feels more real than what actually happened. This makes change feel impossible because the evidence appears overwhelming, even though it is incomplete. Another subtle way identity clinging operates is through fear of inconsistency. People worry that if they change too much, others will accuse them of being fake, so they stay loyal to outdated versions of themselves to maintain a sense of authenticity. But authenticity is not about staying the same. It is about being honest with what is true now, not what was true years ago. Buddhist insight invites you to see the self not as a fixed entity, but as a process unfolding moment by moment. When you observe your thoughts and feelings closely, you notice they arise and pass like weather. Anger appears, stays for a while, then fades. Joy appears, stays, then fades. Even the sense of I shifts depending on the situation. You are not the same person when you are alone at night as you are when you are with friends. The self is fluid, not frozen. When this becomes clear, something softens. You realize you do not have to defend an identity. You do not have to perform consistency. You can respond to life as it is instead of as the story says it should be. This is where growth becomes possible again. Letting go of identity clinging does not mean losing yourself. It means losing the rigid frame that prevents you from discovering new parts of yourself. It is the difference between being a statue and being a river. A statue is admired for its stability, but it cannot move. A river changes constantly, yet it continues forward. Freedom begins the moment you stop asking, "Is this who I am?" and start asking, "Is this what is needed now?" That shift moves you from defending the past to engaging with the present. Instead of protecting an image, you become responsive to reality. You may notice resistance when this starts to happen. The mind will try to pull you back into familiar definitions. It will say you are being unrealistic, inconsistent, or lost. But that resistance is simply the old story trying to survive. If you stay present and curious, it loses power. There is also grief in releasing identity. Even painful identities feel like home because they are known. Letting them go can feel like stepping into emptiness. But that emptiness is not a void, it is space. Space for new ways of being that were impossible before. The strongest prison is not built from what happened to you, but from what you concluded about yourself because of it. When you see this clearly, compassion naturally arises. You understand that you were not weak for clinging to the story. You were trying to make sense of pain. Now you can choose a different way. Growth resumes when the narrative loosens. You begin trying things you once believed were not for you. You speak in situations where you used to stay silent. You allow yourself to be seen without rehearsing a role. Each small act contradicts the old story, and slowly the identity dissolves into something more spacious. The person you become is not a fixed replacement for the old self. It is a living process, open to change, capable of adapting. This is what Buddhism points toward, not the destruction of the self, but liberation from the illusion that it must remain the same. As this attachment softens, you may notice a quiet sense of relief. The pressure to maintain a consistent character fades. Life feels less like a performance and more like an unfolding experience. You stop asking whether you are living up to an image and start noticing whether you are truly alive. And in that openness, movement returns. Not forced, not dramatic, but natural. Like a door that was never locked, finally swinging open because the weight behind it has been removed. As the grip on identity loosens, a new kind of space opens up inside. There is less effort spent defending a fixed me, and for a moment it feels like freedom. But then something strange can happen. Even without the old self-story squeezing you, life can still feel stuck. Not because you don't know who you are anymore, but because your mind keeps leaving the only place where change can actually begin. It keeps stepping out of the present and living somewhere else. This is where the next attachment hides, and it is so normal that most people never notice it. Attachment to psychological time. A quiet warning shows up in everyday life. The body is here, doing the day, but the mind keeps whispering, "Not yet." It keeps leaning into a future that has not arrived or replaying a past that cannot be changed. And that leaning becomes exhausting. It creates a special kind of tiredness, the kind sleep can't fix because it is not physical. It is the tiredness of always waiting to start living. The trap of psychological time is not the clock. It is the story your mind builds around the clock. It is the constant mental habit of measuring your life against before and after, before things went wrong, after things finally improve, before you lost confidence, after you heal, before you became stuck, after you become free. This habit can feel responsible, even wise, because it sounds like planning and reflection. But when it turns into obsession, it becomes a subtle addiction. It keeps your attention trapped in a place that is never fully real. In Buddhism, direct experience is everything. Not because the future doesn't matter and not because the past did not happen, but because the present is where your life actually appears. This moment is where you feel, where you choose, where you act, where you breathe. This moment is where your mind can change. But psychological time teaches the mind to treat the present like a hallway, a place to pass through, not a place to inhabit. So you keep walking through your days like you're rushing to an appointment called later, and you don't even notice that your life is the hallway. One of the clearest signs of attachment to psychological time is the obsession with when. Not what you can do today, not what you can learn now, not what you can face in this moment, but when the big shift will finally come. When will things change? When will the pain go away? When will I feel normal? When will I feel motivated? When will I stop overthinking? When will I become who I'm supposed to be? This seems harmless because it looks like hope. But when can easily become a cage because it turns your life into a waiting room. A waiting mind does not move. It delays action because it is searching for a future feeling first. It is not only waiting for circumstances to improve, it is waiting for time itself to deliver a different version of reality, like time is a savior. But time does not deliver transformation on its own. Time only reveals what your habits keep producing. If the mind stays attached to when, it creates the illusion that life is stagnant because it keeps comparing today to an imagined tomorrow, and today always feels like it is failing. Psychological time also creates pressure that feels like reality. The mind starts assigning emotional meaning to calendar days. It says, I should be further by now. It says, it's too late. It says, I wasted years. It says, if I don't fix this soon, I'm doomed. This pressure is not the same as healthy urgency. Healthy urgency helps you focus. Psychological urgency makes you panic. It makes the future feel like a judge holding a gavel, ready to punish you for not being different fast enough. Under that pressure, people often freeze because the mind is trying to solve a whole lifetime at once. That is one of the most hidden mechanisms of stagnation. When the mind frames the problem as your entire future, it overwhelms your nervous system. The body responds to overwhelm by shutting down, procrastinating, distracting, or seeking comfort. Then the mind looks at the shutdown and says, see, I'm stuck. It becomes a loop. The obsession with when creates anxiety. Anxiety blocks movement. The lack of movement seems like proof that change is not coming. Then anxiety increases and the cycle continues. Buddhist practice interrupts this cycle by bringing attention back to what is immediate. Breath, sensation, hearing, seeing, walking, eating, tension in the jaw, heaviness in the chest, the simple truth of the body existing here. This is not a cute wellness trick. It is training your mind to stop abandoning your life. When attention stays in direct experience, the mind cannot build as many fantasies about when. It has to deal with what is real. And what is real is always workable in small, precise ways. The mind resists this because psychological time gives a strange comfort. It makes you feel busy. It makes you feel like you're doing something by thinking about what happened and what might happen. It gives you the feeling of control, but thinking about life is not the same as living it. Planning is not the same as stepping forward. Regret is not the same as learning. Worry is not the same as preparation. Psychological time often disguises itself as productivity, but it produces very little. It produces mental noise and emotional tension, and it can steal years without looking like theft. There is also a subtle identity hidden inside psychological time, even after you loosen identity clinging. The identity becomes, I am someone in transition. I am someone waiting. I am someone almost there. This identity is softer than the old rigid story, but it can still trap you because it keeps your sense of self in a permanent not yet. You become a person who is always about to start, always about to heal, always about to level up, always about to change. The future becomes a mirage you chase, and each day becomes proof that you haven't reached it. Another way psychological time creates stuckness is through constant mental rehearsal. The mind keeps practicing conversations, outcomes, plans, arguments, future scenarios. It is like playing the same scene in your head again and again, trying to find the perfect version where you don't get hurt. This is a protective instinct. The mind wants safety. But constant rehearsal teaches the nervous system to treat life as danger before it even happens. Then real opportunities arrive, and you feel tired before you begin. The mind has already lived the situation 10 times, and each version ended with fear. So you avoid the real thing, not because you can't do it, but because you are exhausted from the imaginary experience. Psychological time also distorts how you interpret emotions. A sadness appears, and instead of feeling sadness directly, the mind turns it into a timeline. It says, "This has been going on too long." It says, What if I feel like this forever? It says, I used to be happier. The emotion becomes linked to a story about the past and the future, and that story multiplies the suffering. In Buddhism, the first arrow is the raw feeling. The second arrow is the mental story that follows. Psychological time shoots that second arrow constantly. It takes a moment of discomfort and stretches it across months and years, making it feel endless. The obsession with when things will finally change is especially powerful because it seems like it is pointing to progress. It makes you feel like you are looking toward improvement. But it can actually block improvement by making you treat the present as worthless. If your mind believes the real life begins later, then what do you do with today? You endure it. You survive it. You distract yourself through it. And then you wonder why life feels like it is slipping through your fingers. It is because your attention is not here to hold it. This is why people can have a full schedule and still feel empty. They are physically moving through tasks, but mentally they are living in psychological time. They might be eating, but their mind is in tomorrow. They might be talking, but their mind is in yesterday. They might be working, but their mind is fantasizing about quitting. Nothing feels complete because nothing is fully lived. Then the day ends, and it feels like nothing happened, and the mind calls that stuckness. There is also a cruel effect that psychological time has on meaning. Meaning is not only found in big outcomes. Meaning is often felt in presence, in attention, in being truly here with whatever you are doing. When attention keeps leaving, meaning collapses. Even good things lose their flavor. A meal is eaten while scrolling. A walk is taken while worrying. A conversation happens while planning what to say next. A moment of quiet arrives, and the mind fills it with future problems. This is not because you are broken. This is because the mind has been trained to treat presence as unimportant. It has been trained to chase a future state. Buddhism calls this chasing dukkha, suffering, because the mind is constantly reaching for a different moment than the one it has. It is like being thirsty while sitting beside a river, because you keep thinking about the water you might drink tomorrow. The river is here, the thirst is here, but the mind is not here. Psychological time also feeds perfectionism in a different way than identity clinging. Identity clinging says, I must stay consistent. Psychological time says, I must time my life perfectly. It makes you believe there is a right moment for everything, and if you miss it, you are doomed. This creates fear of starting. It creates fear of choosing. It creates fear of committing. Because commitment means time moves forward. And if you are obsessed with the perfect timing, you will stay in limbo, so you can keep the fantasy alive that you'll begin at the best moment. But life does not offer perfect moments. Life offers moments, and the cost of waiting for perfect is often permanent delay. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from being trapped in mental time, the pain of being absent from your own life. You look back and realize years passed, and you were not truly present for them. You were always thinking about the next chapter. Then the mind panics and tries to catch up. It tries to fix everything quickly. It tries to force transformation. That panic fuels more obsession with when. It becomes desperate. And desperation makes you cling even harder to the future, because the present feels like evidence of failure. This is where Buddhism offers a different relationship to time. It does not deny planning. It does not reject learning from the past. It simply refuses to let the mind live there. It trains you to relate to time through skillful action rather than obsessive thought. The past becomes a teacher, not a prison. The future becomes a direction, not a fantasy land. The present becomes the ground, not a waiting room. One practical way this looks is very simple. Instead of asking, when will I change, you start asking, what is one small action that aligns with change today? Not as a motivational trick, but as a shift in attention. Your mind may want to solve your entire life, but your life can only be lived one step at a time. The obsession with when is the mind trying to jump to the end of the story. Direct experience teaches you to write the next sentence. Another practical shift is learning the difference between clock time and mental time. Clock time helps you schedule. Mental time creates suffering when it becomes obsession. You can notice this directly by paying attention to the sensation in your body when you think about time. When psychological time takes over, the body often tightens. There is pressure in the chest. There is tension in the forehead. There is a restless need to do something, but no clear action appears. That is mental time, not reality. Reality is quieter. Reality offers small options. Reality says, breathe, stand up, drink water, send the message, open the document, take the walk. Reality is immediate. Mindfulness becomes the tool that returns you from mental time to reality. But mindfulness is not just noticing your breath for a few minutes. It is noticing how your mind keeps leaving. It is seeing the exact moment you slip into yesterday or tomorrow. It is learning to catch yourself when the when chant begins. It is returning again and again to what is actually happening. This is training. And training changes the brain. Each return is like strengthening a muscle. Over time, the present becomes less unfamiliar. It becomes less empty. It becomes more livable. Psychological time also creates the illusion that you need a complete plan before you can move. It says, don't start until you know the whole path, but in reality, you often learn the path by walking it. The mind wants certainty first. Life offers clarity through contact. When you stay attached to future certainty, you deny yourself the feedback that only action can give. Then you feel stuck. The stuckness is not because you lack a plan. It is because you refuse to act without a guarantee. A Buddhist approach is more humble. It accepts not knowing. It accepts that uncertainty is part of being alive. It does not treat uncertainty as a problem to solve before you begin. It treats uncertainty as a condition you learn to carry with steadiness. This is a huge shift. It turns time from a threat into a flow. Instead of waiting for certainty, you learn to move with awareness while uncertainty is present. The mind may still whisper when, but you stop obeying it. Another hidden way psychological time holds you is through what could be called emotional deadlines. The mind creates a schedule for how you should feel. It says, I should be over this by now. It says, I should be happier by now. It says, I should have moved on by now. These deadlines create shame. Shame creates avoidance. Avoidance creates more delay. And then the mind punishes you again. This is suffering created by a timeline that was never real. Buddhism softens this by returning to compassion and reality. Feelings do not obey schedules. Healing is not linear. Growth is not a straight line. The mind hates that. The mind wants a predictable timeline. But life is not a machine. Life is a living process. When you accept this, you stop fighting your own pace. You stop adding shame to normal human experience. And that alone reduces the weight that makes you feel stuck. There is also a trap where psychological time turns self-improvement into a kind of constant measurement. You keep checking, am I better yet? Am I different yet? Is it working yet? This checking seems like accountability, but it can become obsession. It keeps your attention on the result rather than the practice. And when attention stays on the result, every day feels like failure because it is not finished. This creates discouragement, and discouragement feeds quitting. Then you restart again, and the loop continues. A Buddhist perspective places attention on practice, not as blind repetition, but as steady cultivation. If you water a plant and then stare at it every hour asking, "Did you grow yet?" you will feel frustrated. Growth happens in its own way, but it happens faster when you stop harassing it. Your job is to create conditions. That is it. Psychological time wants to force the timeline. Direct experience asks you to do the next right action and return to the moment. The obsession with when things will finally change can also show up in spiritual ways. People may chase enlightenment like it is a future achievement. They may treat peace like a finish line. They may believe they must arrive at a permanent state. This is still psychological time. It turns spirituality into another future project. Buddhism points to a different truth. Peace is not only an end state, it is a way of relating to what arises now. That does not mean you are calm all the time. It means you stop demanding that life feel perfect before you allow yourself to live it. There is a powerful phrase hidden inside this teaching. The present is not a problem to escape. It is the place where freedom begins, not in theory, in your nervous system, in your attention, in your breath, in your ability to stay with what is here without running away into then and later. When you start living less in psychological time, something surprising happens. You gain time. Not more hours on the clock, but more life inside the hours you already have. A day feels fuller, not because you did more, but because you were actually there for it. You begin to notice small moments. You begin to taste food. You begin to hear silence. You begin to feel your own body again. And in that return, movement becomes natural. You stop waiting for life to begin because you are no longer living in the future. This does not mean you never think about tomorrow. It means tomorrow stops being your refuge. It means the past stops being your home. It means you stop living in memory and fantasy more than you live in reality. It means you stop feeding the illusion that change arrives on its own when a certain date comes. You see that change begins when attention returns to this moment and action becomes possible again. The biggest illusion psychological time creates is that you are stuck until something external shifts. But the truth is more precise. You are stuck when your attention is trapped in a timeline instead of rooted in direct experience. Because direct experience is where choice lives, and choice is where change begins. From here, the next attachment becomes easier to see, because once you stop living in the past and future so much, you notice what you are secretly waiting for inside. Not just a date, not just a circumstance, but a feeling of safety, a feeling of certainty, a feeling of readiness. And that craving to feel safe before you act is another powerful chain, one that keeps life permanently paused while you wait for an emotion that was never meant to be your permission slip. As attention returns from the past and the future into the living present, another hidden pattern begins to reveal itself. You are no longer lost in time, yet something still holds you at the edge of action. The days are clearer, the mind is less scattered, but your feet hesitate when it is time to step forward. That hesitation is not confusion anymore. It is something quieter, something deeply human, the need to feel safe before moving. This is where the next attachment lives, not in memory or anticipation, but in emotion itself. There is a particular ache that comes from standing at the doorway of your own life and not crossing it. You can see what needs to be done. You can sense the direction. Yet a voice inside says, not yet. It says you must wait until the fear fades, until confidence appears, until certainty settles in your chest. This voice sounds protective, even wise, but it quietly keeps your life paused. Craving for emotional certainty is one of the most powerful forms of attachment because it disguises itself as caution. It convinces you that acting while afraid is dangerous, that beginning without clarity is irresponsible, that movement without confidence is doomed. So you wait. You prepare. You analyze. You gather more information. You try to stabilize your feelings before you take the step. And while you are doing all of this, time moves, opportunities pass, energy fades, and the sense of being stuck deepens. The mind believes that emotions must align before action is allowed. It believes that readiness is a feeling, not a decision. But emotions are not stable signals. They shift with sleep, stress, environment, memories, even with the weather. If you wait for your inner world to become perfectly calm before you move, you may wait forever. Life does not clear the path emotionally before asking you to walk it. This craving often begins as a survival strategy. At some point, acting while uncertain may have led to pain, embarrassment, or failure. The mind learned to associate discomfort with danger, so it started demanding reassurance before allowing risk. Over time, that demand became automatic. Now, every meaningful step feels like a threat because it activates the old memory of instability. The body tightens, the chest feels heavy, the mind races with worst-case scenarios, and the instinct is to retreat. Retreat brings temporary relief. Relief feels like safety. The mind interprets this as proof that waiting was the right choice. This reinforces the habit. Each time you avoid discomfort, the need for emotional certainty grows stronger. What began as caution becomes paralysis. You are not just protecting yourself from pain anymore. You are protecting yourself from growth. Buddhist insight points out that emotions are conditions, not commands. Fear is a sensation. Anxiety is a wave of energy. Doubt is a pattern of thought. None of these are instructions about what you must do. They are experiences that arise and pass. When you treat them as orders, you surrender your freedom to them. When you observe them as passing events, you regain the ability to act even while they are present. A major reason people feel stuck is that they interpret discomfort as a stop sign rather than as a signal of unfamiliar territory. Growth often feels like instability because it disrupts patterns that once kept you predictable. The nervous system prefers what it knows, even if what it knows is limiting. So stepping into something new triggers resistance. That resistance is not proof that the step is wrong. It is proof that the step is different. Craving emotional certainty also turns life into a constant rehearsal. You think through possibilities, visualize outcomes, and try to predict how you will feel in every scenario. This mental preparation can feel productive, but it often replaces real movement. The mind rehearses courage without expressing it. It rehearses conversations without having them. It rehearses decisions without committing to them. Eventually, the rehearsal becomes a substitute for living. Another effect of waiting to feel ready is the erosion of trust in yourself. Each time you delay action because the emotional state is not perfect, you send a message to your mind that you are not capable of handling discomfort. This weakens confidence, which then increases the need for certainty. It becomes a loop where the lack of action reduces self-belief, and the reduced self-belief increases hesitation. People often assume confidence comes before action, but confidence usually grows after action. It is built through experience, not imagination. When you step into uncertainty and survive, the nervous system recalibrates. It learns that discomfort is not fatal. Waiting for confidence first is like waiting to be strong before lifting anything heavy. Strength is the result of lifting, not the prerequisite. Craving safety before movement also narrows your world. You begin choosing only what feels secure, predictable, and controlled. Over time, the range of experiences shrinks. You stay within familiar environments, familiar conversations, familiar routines. This creates the illusion of stability, but it also drains vitality. Life becomes repetitive, and repetition feeds the feeling of stagnation. Then the mind concludes that nothing ever changes, not realizing that the avoidance of discomfort is what keeps everything the same. The attachment to emotional certainty also interferes with intuition. Genuine intuition is quiet and subtle. It often suggests action even when fear is present. But when you demand emotional calm first, you drown out that signal. You mistake fear for warning instead of seeing it as energy that can be carried. As a result, You disconnect from the deeper intelligence that guides movement. There is also a social dimension to this craving. Many people fear acting without approval because they equate safety with acceptance. They want reassurance that others will understand, support, or validate the step before taking it. This places your direction in the hands of external reactions. When approval is uncertain, you freeze. This is not just fear of failure, it is fear of disconnection. Buddhism invites a different relationship with fear. It does not promise the absence of fear. It trains the capacity to stay present while fear is there. When you observe fear without running from it, its intensity changes. It becomes sensation rather than identity. You realize you can breathe, move, speak, and decide while the fear is still humming in the background. This realization breaks the belief that safety must come first. Waiting to feel ready can also create an illusion of control over the future. The mind believes that if it can stabilize emotions beforehand, it can prevent negative outcomes. But life does not negotiate with emotional preparation. You cannot eliminate uncertainty by rehearsing. You cannot guarantee success by calming yourself first. What you can do is increase resilience by engaging with reality as it unfolds. A subtle danger of craving certainty is that it turns life into a test you must pass before you are allowed to live. You feel like you must become a different person before you can pursue what matters. You must become fearless before taking risks, healed before forming connections, disciplined before pursuing dreams. This sets impossible conditions. It places life behind a gate that never opens because the criteria keep changing. Emotional readiness is also affected by the stories you tell about discomfort. If you label anxiety as weakness, you will try to eliminate it before acting. If you see it as energy, you can channel it into movement. The meaning you assign to your feelings determines whether they freeze you or fuel you. There is a quiet strength in learning to move with uncertainty. It feels like walking through fog without seeing the entire path. Each step reveals the next piece of ground. This kind of movement builds trust in reality rather than in predictions. It teaches you that clarity often comes after action, not before it. Another hidden layer of this attachment is perfectionism disguised as caution. You delay because you want the conditions to be ideal. You want the plan to be complete, the timing to be right, the risk to be minimal. But perfection is an endless horizon. The closer you get, the further it moves. Waiting for ideal conditions keeps you stationary while life unfolds without you. Craving emotional certainty also intensifies overthinking. The mind tries to solve feelings through analysis, but analysis cannot replace experience. You can think about swimming for years and still fear water. The fear dissolves only when you enter the water and discover you can float. Similarly, the fear of action dissolves through action, not through thought. When you finally act despite uncertainty, something shifts. It is not dramatic at first. It is a small sense of space inside, a realization that you can move even while the heart is pounding. That realization accumulates. Each step taken without emotional guarantees expands your capacity. Over time, you rely less on feelings as permission and more on values as direction. Values provide stability that emotions cannot. If you know what matters to you, you can act in alignment with that even when you feel unsteady. This creates a deeper form of safety, one rooted in integrity rather than comfort. You become less dependent on how you feel in the moment and more grounded in what you believe is meaningful. Waiting for certainty also drains energy because anticipation consumes attention. You are constantly scanning your inner state, checking if the right feeling has arrived. This self-monitoring keeps you tense. When you release the need to feel perfect before acting, attention returns to the task itself. Energy that was spent on worrying becomes available for doing. The paradox is that safety grows through engagement, not avoidance. Each time you face discomfort and survive, your nervous system learns that the world is not as threatening as it assumed. This reduces baseline anxiety. Over time, situations that once felt overwhelming become manageable. But this learning cannot happen if you never enter the situations. Craving emotional certainty can also distort your perception of risk. You may treat minor discomfort as catastrophic while ignoring the long-term cost of staying still. The cost of inaction accumulates quietly. Dreams fade, skills atrophy, opportunities disappear. By the time you realize it, the pain of regret may be greater than the pain you were trying to avoid. Buddhist practice encourages steady effort rather than dramatic leaps. Small actions taken consistently can bypass the need for overwhelming courage. When you break movement into manageable steps, the nervous system adapts gradually. You do not need to eliminate fear. You need to reduce the distance between intention and action. Another key insight is that feelings often follow behavior. When you engage with life, positive emotions like confidence and enthusiasm emerge naturally. When you withdraw, lethargy and doubt increase. Action is not only an expression of motivation, it is a generator of motivation. Learning to tolerate uncertainty also deepens compassion for yourself. You stop judging your fear as failure. You see it as part of being human. This reduces the internal conflict that drains energy. Instead of fighting your emotions, you carry them with kindness while moving forward. At some point, you realize that readiness is not a moment you wait for. It is a quality you cultivate by showing up. Each time you act without guarantees, you expand the range of what feels possible. The threshold for movement lowers. What once required intense courage becomes ordinary. This shift transforms your relationship with life. Instead of asking whether you feel safe enough to begin, you ask what direction aligns with your deeper values. Instead of waiting for clarity, you generate clarity through experience. Instead of postponing movement until fear disappears, you move while fear is present. As this attachment loosens, the sense of stagnation fades. Life starts flowing again, not because circumstances suddenly become easy, but because you stop demanding emotional perfection before participating. You discover that uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the environment in which growth happens. As the need for emotional certainty loosens, movement becomes possible again. You begin stepping forward even when your hands shake, even when your mind is unsure. But then another pattern quietly surfaces, one that feels almost confusing. You are no longer waiting for safety, yet you still find yourself drifting back into the same situations that hurt you. The fear of acting is not stopping you anymore, but something else is pulling you backward. It is not hesitation now, it is familiarity. The mind is choosing what it knows, even when what it knows is painful. This is where attachment to familiar suffering reveals itself. There is a strange heaviness in realizing that some pain feels like home. Not because it is pleasant, not because you want it, but because it is known. The unknown has no shape, no script, no guarantee. Familiar suffering, on the other hand, has predictable patterns. You know how it begins, how it unfolds, how it ends. You know the emotional rhythm of it. And the mind, which is designed to reduce uncertainty, often chooses predictable pain over uncertain freedom. This attachment forms slowly, often without awareness. A person who has lived in tension for years may feel uneasy when things become calm. Silence feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary, like something is about to go wrong. So the mind unconsciously recreates conflict, worry, or pressure, just to restore the emotional environment it recognizes. It is not seeking pain, it is seeking familiarity. Buddhist teachings describe this as clinging, the habit of holding on even when holding on causes suffering. The mind clings to patterns because patterns provide identity and continuity. If you have spent years defining yourself through struggle, letting go of struggle can feel like losing yourself. Who are you without the battle? Who are you without the story of overcoming? Without the familiar pain, the mind feels exposed, undefined. Attachment to familiar suffering also explains why people repeat relationships that mirror old wounds. Someone who grew up with emotional unpredictability may feel drawn to partners who are inconsistent. Stability may feel boring or unreal. Chaos feels alive because it activates the emotional patterns the nervous system learned early. Even when the mind knows this pattern is harmful, the body gravitates toward it because it is recognizable. The same pattern appears in work, habits, and daily routines. A person may complain about stress, but resist changing the lifestyle that produces it. Another may long for rest, but fill every free moment with activity. When asked why, the answer is often unclear. It feels uncomfortable to stop, uncomfortable to change, uncomfortable to enter unknown territory. So the familiar cycle continues. This attachment is reinforced by memory. The mind selectively recalls experiences that confirm the belief that pain is normal. It downplays moments of ease because they do not fit the narrative. Over time, suffering becomes the baseline expectation. Anything outside that baseline feels temporary or suspicious. The mind prepares for disappointment even during positive experiences, which limits the ability to fully receive them. Familiar suffering can also create a sense of control. When pain is predictable, it feels manageable. Unknown freedom has no rules yet. It requires learning new ways of being, new responses, new boundaries. That learning process involves mistakes, uncertainty, vulnerability. The mind often chooses the pain it understands over the freedom it must learn. There is also a hidden identity component here. People sometimes define themselves through what they endure. They become the strong one, the survivor, the one who carries burdens. Letting go of suffering can feel like betraying that identity. It can feel like dismissing the past or invalidating the effort it took to survive. But healing does not erase the past. It releases the need to relive it. Another layer of this attachment is the fear of disappointment. If you step into freedom and it does not last, the fall back into pain may feel worse than staying where you are. So the mind avoids hope to avoid potential loss. It chooses the certainty of current discomfort over the risk of future heartbreak. This is not weakness, it is self-protection that has become outdated. Familiar suffering also shapes expectations. If you believe life is supposed to be hard, you may interpret neutral events as threats. Small challenges feel like confirmation that nothing has changed. This perception filters reality in a way that keeps the old pattern alive. It is not that life never improves, it is that improvements are not trusted enough to register fully. In Buddhist practice, awareness of this pattern is crucial. When you see that the mind is gravitating toward pain because it is familiar, a gap opens between impulse and action. You can pause. You can choose differently, even if the new choice feels strange. That strangeness is a sign that you are stepping outside the old conditioning. Freedom often feels unfamiliar at first. It may feel quiet, empty, even boring compared to the intensity of suffering. This does not mean it is wrong. It means your nervous system is adjusting to a different baseline. With time, the body learns that calm is safe. The absence of drama becomes peaceful rather than unsettling. Letting go of familiar suffering also requires grieving. You are not only releasing pain, you are releasing the identity built around that pain. You are releasing habits that once protected you. You are stepping into a version of yourself that has no script yet. That transition can feel lonely because the old roles no longer fit and the new ones are still forming. Compassion becomes essential in this process. Instead of judging yourself for returning to old patterns, you recognize that those patterns once served a purpose. They helped you survive. Now you are choosing to live differently. That choice takes patience. Change happens gradually as the mind learns that safety can exist without suffering. Another important step is building tolerance for unfamiliar emotions. When something good happens, instead of dismissing it or waiting for it to end, you allow yourself to experience it fully. You let joy linger without anticipating loss. You let calm exist without searching for problems. This retrains the mind to accept positive states as real and sustainable. Attachment to familiar suffering also dissolves when you create new experiences that contradict the old narrative. When you surround yourself with people who communicate openly, when you set boundaries that protect your energy, when you pursue activities that nourish rather than drain you, the brain begins forming new associations. These associations slowly replace the old blueprint of pain. There is also power in recognizing that unknown freedom does not require you to become someone else overnight. It requires small shifts repeated consistently, choosing rest instead of overwork, choosing honesty instead of suppression, choosing connection instead of isolation. Each small decision weakens the grip of familiar suffering. As the attachment loosens, you may notice a surprising lightness. The constant background tension fades. You no longer expect something to go wrong at every moment. You begin trusting that life can hold ease as well as challenge. This trust is not naive optimism. It is a grounded confidence built from experience. The mind may still attempt to return to old patterns, especially during stress. That is natural. Conditioning does not disappear instantly, but with awareness, you recognize the pull and gently redirect yourself. You remind yourself that familiar does not always mean safe, and unfamiliar does not always mean dangerous. In Buddhism, freedom is not the absence of difficulty. It is the absence of compulsive attachment. You still experience pain, loss, and uncertainty, but you are not trapped in cycles that recreate them unnecessarily. You respond to life rather than repeating it. When you stop clinging to predictable pain, space opens for new possibilities. Relationships deepen because you are no longer guarded by old defenses. Creativity returns because your energy is not consumed by survival mode. Curiosity replaces fear because the unknown becomes a place of exploration rather than threat. This shift also changes how you view your past. Instead of seeing it as a chain that defines you, you see it as a chapter that shaped you but does not confine you. Gratitude may even emerge for the strength it built, without needing to continue the suffering to prove that strength. Over time, freedom stops feeling foreign. It becomes the new normal. You learn to trust calm. You learn to trust kindness. You learn to trust yourself outside the old patterns. Life feels less like a battle and more like a landscape you can move through with awareness. As the grip of familiar suffering loosens, life begins to feel wider. The old cycles lose their hold, and for the first time there is space to breathe without expecting the next wave of pain. But in that space, another quiet struggle can appear. When you are no longer pulled backward by known suffering, the mind may start drifting sideways into something more subtle. It begins looking at paths not taken, versions of yourself that never came to life, timelines that exist only in thought. Instead of being trapped by pain you recognize, you become haunted by possibilities you can never verify. This is where attachment shifts from what was familiar to what was imagined. There is a particular sadness that comes from thinking about who you could have been. It is not sharp like fresh loss, but it lingers like a quiet echo. You remember choices you made, chances you missed, moments when fear spoke louder than courage. The mind starts building an alternate life where everything unfolded differently. In that life, you said yes instead of no. You started earlier. You stayed when you left. You left when you stayed. This imagined version of yourself becomes polished, almost flawless, because it never had to face real consequences. It exists in a world where mistakes did not happen. Clinging to these unlived lives creates a strange paralysis. You are not anchored to the past in the usual sense, and you are not fully present in the current moment either. Part of you is living in a story that cannot be touched. The imagined self becomes a silent standard you feel you can never reach. No matter what you accomplish now, it seems smaller than what that alternate version might have achieved. The result is a quiet sense of inadequacy that follows you without a clear source. Buddhist teaching points out that the mind fabricates realities all the time. Thoughts appear vivid enough to feel real, even when they are only mental constructions. When you replay alternate histories, you are not reviewing facts. You are rehearsing a fantasy built from memory fragments and assumptions, yet the body responds as if the loss were real. Regret tightens the chest. Longing drains energy. The present feels dim compared to the imagined brightness of what might have been. One reason this attachment is so powerful is that it feeds on uncertainty. Because you can never know how those alternate paths would have unfolded, the mind fills the gaps with ideal outcomes. It rarely imagines the difficulties that would have come with those choices. It rarely considers that success in one area might have led to loss in another. The imagined life becomes a one-sided story where everything aligns perfectly, making your real life seem flawed by comparison. This pattern can also keep you from investing fully in what you have now. If part of your attention is always drifting toward the unlived version, you approach the present half-heartedly. Opportunities feel temporary because you are still mentally anchored elsewhere. Relationships feel incomplete because you are measuring them against people who exist only in imagination. Even progress can feel hollow because it does not match the ideal script. Clinging to alternate lives often carries a hidden belief that happiness was located at a specific fork in the road. The mind says, if I had chosen differently, everything would be better. This belief simplifies life into a single turning point. Ignoring the countless variables that shape any outcome, it places the entire weight of fulfillment on one decision, which makes the present feel irreparably compromised. There is also a subtle identity tied to regret. You may start seeing yourself as the person who missed their chance, the one who arrived too late, the one who fell behind. This identity becomes another form of clinging, not to suffering, but to a narrative of lost potential. It can be comforting in a painful way because it explains why things feel difficult. Letting go of that story means accepting uncertainty about who you are now, and that uncertainty can feel destabilizing. Another layer of this attachment is comparison across timelines. You measure your current self against a hypothetical self that had perfect foresight. This comparison is inherently unfair because it pits reality against imagination. The imagined version never had to navigate real obstacles, never had to make decisions without knowing the outcome, yet you hold yourself accountable to its imagined success. Buddhist practice encourages returning to what is directly experienced. When thoughts about alternate lives arise, the instruction is not to suppress them, but to observe them as mental events. You notice the images, the emotions, the bodily sensations they trigger. You recognize that they are passing phenomena, not commands to rewrite history. This awareness weakens their hold because it shifts you from immersion to observation. It is also helpful to question the assumption that the unlived life would have been easier. Every path carries challenges. A career that looks glamorous from the outside may involve sacrifices you were not prepared to make. A relationship that seems ideal might have introduced conflicts you cannot foresee. By acknowledging the unknown complexity of those paths, you soften the illusion that they were guaranteed to lead to happiness. Letting go of attachment to imagined selves also requires forgiveness. Not only forgiving others who influenced your choices, but forgiving the version of you who made decisions with limited knowledge. At the time, you acted based on what you understood, what you felt capable of, what resources were available. Holding that version of yourself to the wisdom you have now is a form of cruelty. Compassion allows you to release the expectation that you should have known better. There is freedom in recognizing that your life is not a failed draft of another life. It is its own unfolding story, shaped by conditions you could not fully control. When you stop measuring it against imagined timelines, you begin to see its unique texture. The experiences you once labeled as detours become sources of insight. The skills you developed in unexpected ways become visible. Your path may not resemble the one you envisioned, but it has depth that the imagined version lacks. Clinging to alternate lives can also distract from the possibilities still available. When attention is consumed by what cannot be changed, it misses what can be created now. You may overlook new directions because they do not match the old dream. Yet life continues, offering chances to grow, connect and contribute in ways that were not visible before. There is a quiet courage in accepting that your life will never match the perfect narrative you once carried. That acceptance is not defeat, it is maturity. It allows you to invest fully in what is real instead of chasing what is unreachable. The energy once spent on regret becomes available for action. You begin to see that meaning is not located in a single outcome, but in the way you engage with whatever unfolds. Buddhism teaches impermanence, the understanding that everything changes. This includes the self you thought you would become. The person you imagined at 20 may not exist at 40, not because you failed, but because life moved in directions you could not predict. Accepting this impermanence allows you to release the illusion that there was one correct version of you waiting to be realized. As you release the imagined self, you may feel a sense of relief mixed with sadness. Relief because the pressure to live up to an impossible standard fades. Sadness because you are saying goodbye to a dream that once gave you direction. Both emotions are natural. They mark the transition from fantasy to reality. Over time, the present begins to feel more substantial. You notice details that were previously overshadowed by comparison. Small achievements feel meaningful because they are no longer weighed against an invisible benchmark. Relationships deepen because you are fully there, not mentally elsewhere. Gratitude emerges, not as forced positivity, but as recognition of what is actually in your life. Another benefit of letting go is the recovery of creativity. When you are no longer bound to a specific narrative of who you should have been, you become open to new possibilities. You may discover interests you never considered before, strengths that were hidden by old expectations. Your identity becomes fluid again, capable of evolving rather than chasing a fixed ideal. This shift also changes how you relate to others. You stop projecting your imagined life onto them. You appreciate their journeys without comparing them to your own. Envy softens into curiosity. Resentment dissolves into understanding. The world feels less like a competition of timelines and more like a collection of unique stories unfolding simultaneously. There is a quiet wisdom in realizing that no life path is complete. Every choice closes some doors while opening others. The richness of your experience comes from the particular combination of doors that opened, not from the ones that remained closed. When you accept this, regret loses its grip. Eventually, the imagined selves fade into the background. They may still appear occasionally, like old photographs found in a drawer, but they no longer define you. You can acknowledge them without longing to step into them. They become reminders of how the mind constructs possibilities, not measures of your worth. From this place, movement feels lighter. You are no longer dragged by what could have been. You are free to respond to what is here. Your life regains momentum, not because the past changed, but because your relationship to it did. As the pull of unlived alternate lives fades, attention slowly returns to what is actually here. The ghosts of who you could have been lose their grip, and your energy begins to settle into the life unfolding in front of you. Yet something else quietly steps in to take their place. Instead of looking backward at imagined versions of yourself, the mind starts looking outward. It searches faces, reactions, responses, signals. It wants confirmation that you are seen, that you matter, that your existence has weight. Without that confirmation, a strange emptiness can appear, as if your life is only real when someone else acknowledges it. This is where attachment shifts again, from imagined timelines to external validation. There is a quiet sting in realizing how much your sense of self can depend on other people noticing you, not just appreciating you, but confirming that you are significant. A compliment lifts your mood for hours. Silence from someone important feels like rejection. Approval feels like oxygen. Indifference feels like suffocation. The mind begins to measure its worth by reactions, by praise, by attention. When recognition is present, you feel solid. When it disappears, you feel invisible. Attachment to external validation forms early. As children, approval from caregivers signals safety. Smiles, encouragement, and attention teach the nervous system that connection equals survival. Over time, this biological need for connection can transform into a psychological need for constant recognition. Instead of seeking belonging, you begin seeking proof of value. The distinction is subtle but powerful. In adult life, this attachment becomes more complex. You may no longer need approval to survive physically, but the emotional habit remains. Achievements feel incomplete unless someone celebrates them. Effort feels wasted if no one notices. Even personal growth can feel meaningless without acknowledgement. You begin performing parts of your life for an audience, even when the audience is imaginary. This creates an invisible cage because your sense of worth becomes conditional. It rises and falls based on feedback you cannot control. If someone praises you, you feel validated. If they criticize you, you feel diminished. If they ignore you, you question your existence. Your inner stability depends on variables outside your reach. This is exhausting because the world is unpredictable. People are inconsistent. Attention shifts, praise fades, and when it does, you feel like you have lost something essential. Buddhist teachings describe this as clinging to praise and fear of blame, two forces that can dominate the mind if left unexamined. When you depend on recognition to feel real, you are constantly scanning for signs of approval. You interpret tone, body language, social cues, and responses as indicators of your value. This hyper-awareness drains energy that could be used for living authentically. The need for validation also shapes behavior. You may choose paths that earn admiration rather than those that align with your true interests. You may suppress opinions to avoid disapproval. You may stay in environments that reward your performance but ignore your well-being. Over time, you become disconnected from your own voice because you are listening primarily to the reactions of others. This attachment can be particularly strong in a world where visibility is equated with importance. Social platforms, public recognition, and external metrics reinforce the belief that being noticed equals being valuable. When attention becomes a currency, it is easy to mistake popularity for meaning. Yet, attention is fleeting. It moves quickly, leaving behind a sense of emptiness when it fades. Another consequence of relying on external validation is the loss of intrinsic motivation. When recognition becomes the main reward, activities that do not produce visible acknowledgement lose appeal. You may stop pursuing hobbies, quiet goals, or private growth because they do not generate applause. Life narrows to what can be seen and praised, leaving a large part of your potential unexplored. The invisible cage tightens when you internalize others' expectations. You start anticipating what will gain approval and adjusting accordingly. This can lead to chronic self-monitoring, where every action is filtered through the question of how it will be perceived. Authentic expression becomes risky because it might disrupt the image that earns validation. You become careful instead of honest, controlled instead of spontaneous. This pattern also affects relationships. When validation is the primary goal, connection becomes transactional. You may give attention to receive it back. You may share vulnerabilities hoping for reassurance rather than genuine understanding. If the reassurance does not come, resentment builds. Relationships feel unstable because they are based on emotional supply rather than mutual presence. Buddhist practice encourages shifting attention inward, not in a self-centered way, but in a grounded way. When you learn to witness your own experience without needing confirmation, you begin to feel stable from within. You notice your thoughts, emotions, and sensations directly. You acknowledge your efforts even when no one else does. This internal recognition builds a quiet confidence that does not depend on applause. Letting go of external validation does not mean rejecting feedback entirely. Feedback can be valuable. The difference lies in how much authority you give it. When validation is information rather than identity, you can appreciate praise without becoming attached to it. You can consider criticism without collapsing under it. You remain centered because your sense of self is not outsourced. One way to loosen this attachment is by reconnecting with personal values. Values provide direction that does not rely on approval. When you act according to what you believe is meaningful, the action itself becomes satisfying. You no longer need someone to witness it for it to matter. This does not eliminate the desire for connection, but it reduces the dependence on recognition as proof of worth. Another important step is tolerating the discomfort of invisibility. There will be times when your efforts go unnoticed, when your growth happens quietly, when your contributions are not acknowledged. Instead of interpreting this as evidence of insignificance, you learn to see it as part of life's rhythm. Many meaningful changes occur without public attention. Private transformation is still transformation. Attachment to validation also distorts how you interpret silence. When someone does not respond as expected, the mind fills the gap with negative assumptions. It concludes that you are unimportant, uninteresting, or unwanted. In reality, silence often has nothing to do with you. People are absorbed in their own concerns. Recognizing this reduces the tendency to personalize every lack of response. As you release the need for constant recognition, your behavior becomes more aligned with authenticity. You express yourself because it feels true, not because it will be rewarded. You pursue goals because they resonate, not because they impress. This shift brings a sense of freedom that external validation can never provide. There is also a deeper realization that your existence does not require proof. You do not need to perform your life for it to be real. You do not need applause to justify your presence. The simple fact of being alive is enough. This understanding is not theoretical. It becomes tangible through mindful awareness of breathing, sensing, and perceiving. You experience yourself directly rather than through the lens of others' opinions. Releasing attachment to validation also transforms how you view success. Success stops being a spectacle and becomes a quiet alignment between intention and action. It may not look impressive from the outside, but it feels coherent from the inside. This coherence reduces anxiety because you are no longer chasing approval as the final measure. Another effect is increased resilience. When criticism arrives, it does not destabilize you as easily because your foundation is internal. You can evaluate whether the criticism contains useful information without letting it define you. This allows growth without self-rejection. As dependence on validation fades, relationships become healthier. You connect with others out of genuine interest rather than need. You listen without strategizing how to be liked. You share without calculating how you will be perceived. This authenticity invites deeper connections because it removes the pressure to perform. The invisible cage opens gradually. At first, you may still feel the urge to check for reactions, to seek reassurance, to measure your worth externally. Over time, these impulses lose urgency. You begin to trust your own perception of your life. You become less reactive to approval and disapproval. Your emotional state stabilizes because it is no longer tied to unpredictable feedback. Freedom from this attachment also reveals how much energy was spent managing impressions. That energy becomes available for creativity, exploration, and rest. You may find yourself engaging in activities simply because they feel meaningful, without worrying about recognition. This simplicity brings a quiet joy that is not dependent on outcome. The deeper truth is that recognition can never fully satisfy the need for belonging if you are not connected to yourself. External validation fills a temporary gap but does not create lasting stability. Self-acceptance, on the other hand, provides a steady base from which you can engage with the world without losing yourself. As the need for applause fades, a quieter freedom starts to grow. You stop begging the world to confirm you exist, and you begin standing on your own inner ground. But right there, in the calm that follows, another attachment often reveals itself. It is not loud like approval-seeking. It is not dramatic like regret. It is subtle, practical, even praised by society. It shows up as being organized, disciplined, always thinking ahead. Yet beneath that respectable surface, it can become a hidden addiction. The need to control life so nothing can hurt you, surprise you, or expose you. A strange thing happens when control becomes your comfort. The more you try to lock life into a plan, the more stuck you feel. Not because you're doing nothing, but because your energy gets trapped in preventing uncertainty instead of living. You don't feel free, you feel guarded. You don't feel present. You feel like you're constantly managing something that might go wrong, and that constant management becomes its own prison. There is a particular emotional weight that comes from needing everything to make sense before you move. You wake up and your mind immediately starts arranging the day like a chessboard. It calculates risks, avoids discomfort, predicts outcomes, and tries to reduce every unknown. It sounds like responsibility, but it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like tension with good grammar. This is the hidden addiction to control. It often begins with a real reason. Life may have been chaotic at some point. People may have been unreliable. You may have been disappointed, embarrassed, betrayed, or blindsided. The mind learns a painful lesson. Surprises hurt. So it develops a strategy that seems smart. It says, never be caught off guard again. And from that moment, planning stops being a tool and becomes a shield. At first, the shield helps. It gives structure. It reduces anxiety. It creates a sense of direction. But gradually, the shield turns into a cage because the mind starts demanding something impossible. Certainty in a world built on change. Buddhism points straight at this. Life is impermanent. Everything shifts. Moods change, people change, bodies change, opportunities change, plans change. Even your own desires change. So when the mind clings to control, it is clinging to an illusion. And clinging to an illusion always produces suffering, because reality keeps refusing to cooperate. The addiction to control doesn't always look like someone trying to dominate others. Sometimes it looks like a person who can't relax. Someone who has to know what's coming. Someone who feels anxious when the schedule is open. Someone who needs a 5-year plan just to breathe. Someone who keeps researching, comparing, preparing, optimizing, but never fully committing. They are not lazy. They are not careless. They are trapped in a loop of managing life instead of meeting life. This is where the stuckness appears. Because control often replaces action with preparation, the mind believes that if it can plan perfectly, it can avoid pain. So it keeps planning, it keeps adjusting, it keeps waiting for the moment when the plan feels airtight. But life rarely gives airtight. Life gives weather. You step out, and the sky does what it does. So the controller becomes a person who is always about to start, about to launch, about to change, about to commit, about to become consistent, about to fix everything. But first, just one more plan, one more strategy, one more checklist, one more round of thinking. And the mind calls that progress because it feels busy. But deep down, it is fear wearing a suit. The need to control also creates a special kind of suffering. The suffering of resisting what is already happening. When something changes unexpectedly, the mind tightens. It argues with reality. It says, this shouldn't be happening. It says, this ruins everything. It says, now I'm behind. It says, I can't handle this. The event itself might be difficult, but the real pain multiplies because of the inner fight. The mind is not only facing the problem, it is facing the problem while demanding a different universe. This is one of the clearest Buddhist insights. Pain is part of life, but suffering grows when the mind insists that life must obey its preferences. Control is that insistence, and control is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You have to keep scanning for threats. You have to keep anticipating. You have to keep managing impressions, outcomes, timing, people's reactions, and your own emotions. The nervous system stays on guard, even when the room is quiet. You may call it ambition, but the body experiences it as stress. Over time, the addiction to control can numb joy. Joy requires softness. Joy requires a willingness to be in the moment without gripping it. But a controlling mind is always half in the future, trying to protect the future from the present. Even during good moments, it whispers, "Don't get too comfortable." It searches for what could go wrong. It turns blessings into responsibilities. It turns relaxation into guilt. This is why some people can reach milestones and still feel restless. They achieved something, but they never let themselves receive it. They were too busy controlling what comes next. Control also disguises itself as self-improvement. It says, if I fix myself enough, nothing will hurt me. So you try to perfect your habits, your mindset, your social skills, your routine, your productivity, your body, your brand, your image. Some growth is healthy, but control-driven growth is different. It is fueled by fear, not love. It is the belief that you must become flawless to feel safe. That belief creates stuckness because perfection has no finish line. The mind keeps moving the standard. Each improvement reveals another flaw to fix. So you never arrive at peace. You only arrive at new tasks. Another hidden effect is how control shapes relationships. A controlling mind tries to manage outcomes with people too. It may not be obvious. It might show up as over-explaining to prevent misunderstanding. It might show up as people-pleasing to prevent conflict. It might show up as staying emotionally guarded to prevent rejection. It might show up as testing people to make sure they won't leave. Underneath all of it is the same urge: if I can control the variables, I won't get hurt. But relationships cannot be controlled without being damaged. The more you try to force security, the more you create tension. People feel managed. Conversations feel strategic. Love feels conditional. And deep connection requires the opposite: openness, presence, and the courage to accept uncertainty. Control also narrows your courage. It teaches you to move only when the risk is low. But a meaningful life often requires stepping into situations where certainty is unavailable. Starting something new, creating something, committing to a path, setting a boundary, leaving what drains you, choosing who you want to become. These things always contain unknowns. If you demand control first, you delay the very actions that would move your life forward. This is the paradox that creates stuckness. The more you fear uncertainty, the more you create a life that cannot expand, because expansion requires room. and room requires uncertainty. The Buddhist response is not chaos, it is not careless living. It is something stronger, wise effort with non-clinging. You still set intentions, you still plan, you still act intelligently, but you release the demand that life must match the plan in order for you to be okay. You stop treating deviations as disasters. You treat them as information. You adapt, you respond, you keep moving. This is where control addiction begins to weaken, when you learn that flexibility is a deeper form of strength than rigidity. A controlling mind believes safety comes from certainty. A liberated mind learns safety can come from capacity. Capacity means whatever happens, there is an ability to meet it. Not perfectly, not with a smile every time, but with steadiness. This shift is powerful because it changes what you seek. Instead of trying to control life, you build inner resilience. Instead of trying to eliminate discomfort, you increase your tolerance for it. Instead of trying to guarantee outcomes, you invest in process. This is not a motivational slogan, it is practical psychology. A person who trusts their capacity doesn't need the world to be predictable, they need themselves to be present. Control addiction also keeps you mentally crowded. The mind becomes noisy because it is constantly running simulations. It asks what if 1,000 times. It tries to solve problems that do not exist yet. It treats possibility as reality. Then the body reacts to these imagined threats as if they are happening now. Stress hormones rise, sleep becomes shallow, the chest feels tight, the mind spins, and then you feel stuck because you have no energy left to actually do the thing you were planning for. This is why the controller can look productive but feel exhausted. The mind used all the fuel on imagined fires. Buddhism trains attention to return to what is real. When attention stays with direct experience, the mind cannot spin endless future fantasies as easily. It may still try, but you notice it sooner. You see the moment the mind leaves the present to chase control. You gently return. Breath, body, task, moment. This return is not passive, it is the beginning of freedom. Because control is fed by attention, starve it of attention, and it weakens. This doesn't mean you never plan, it means you stop obsessing. Planning becomes a small part of life again, not the entire structure holding your emotions together. Another way control creates stuckness is through over-attachment to the right choice. The mind believes one wrong decision will ruin everything, so it becomes terrified of choosing. It delays. It keeps options open, it keeps researching, it keeps asking for more clarity. But in trying to avoid the pain of making a wrong choice, it creates the pain of never choosing at all. This is a silent kind of self-betrayal, not dramatic, just constant delay. Buddhist wisdom pushes you toward a different truth. Most decisions are not final prisons. They are steps. You learn from them, you adjust, you grow, but you can't learn from a life you refuse to enter. So the practice is not choose perfectly. The practice is choose consciously, then engage fully, then adapt without self-hatred. Control addiction also makes you fear failure more than you value learning. Failure threatens the plan. It threatens the image of competence. It threatens the hope that if you do everything right, you'll be safe. So the mind avoids situations where failure is possible. But avoiding failure is also avoiding growth, because growth is built on trial, error, feedback, and repetition. This is why control can keep you stuck at the same level for years. Not because you lack talent, but because you refuse the messy process that talent requires. There is a deeper emotional root under control: distrust. Distrust of life, distrust of others, distrust of yourself. When you don't trust your ability to handle what comes, you try to control what comes. So a healing approach is to rebuild trust, slowly and honestly. Trust doesn't mean expecting everything to go well. It means knowing you can meet what comes with presence. And you build that trust the same way you build strength, through small challenges faced consistently. You do one uncomfortable thing and survive it. You do another and learn from it. Over time, the nervous system updates. The world starts feeling less threatening, not because the world became gentle, but because you became capable. This is how control loosens without you forcing it. You don't wrestle the mind into surrender. You teach it through experience that surrender is safe. Surrender in Buddhism is often misunderstood. People think it means giving up. It doesn't. It means releasing the fight with reality. It means letting the present be what it is, while still acting wisely within it. It means not wasting your life energy on arguments with what already happened. It means not demanding guarantees before you live. When you stop forcing life into a plan, something opens. You still have direction, but you're not rigid. You still care, but you're not clenched. You still want good outcomes, but you're not addicted to them. And that shift produces movement, because movement requires openness. A clenched mind cannot flow. It can only push, pull, and panic. An open mind can respond, adjust, and keep going. And this is the real reason control creates the stuckness you fear most. Control makes you rigid, and rigidity cannot adapt. When life inevitably changes, rigidity breaks or freezes. You either collapse into anxiety or you stop moving to protect the plan. In both cases, you feel stuck. But when you loosen control, you become adaptable, and adaptability is freedom in a changing world. As the grip of control loosens, the mind stops trying to force life into perfect order. You begin to accept that not everything can be predicted, prevented, or arranged. But just when that tension fades, another hidden attachment can surface, one that feels deeply justified, almost noble. It is the quiet belief that life should have been fair, that effort should always be rewarded, that kindness should always return kindness, that suffering should make sense, that outcomes should match intentions. When reality refuses to follow this script, something heavy takes root inside, not loud anger, but a slow burning resentment that keeps replaying the same question. Why did this happen to me when I did everything right? There is a particular pain in feeling wronged by life itself. It is different from ordinary disappointment. It carries a sense of injustice that refuses to settle. You see others who did less and received more. You see people who hurt others and still thrive. You remember moments when you tried your best and still lost. The mind keeps gathering evidence, building a silent case against reality. It says the rules were broken. It says the outcome was undeserved. It says something is fundamentally unfair. Attachment to fairness feels reasonable because fairness is a beautiful idea. It represents order, balance, moral symmetry. From childhood, many people are taught that good behavior leads to good outcomes, that hard work pays off, that honesty protects you. These teachings help build character, but they can also create expectations that reality does not always fulfill. Life operates through countless variables, not a single moral equation. Effort matters, but so do timing, circumstances, luck, health, and the choices of others. When expectations of fairness collide with the randomness of existence, the result is confusion mixed with bitterness. Resentment grows because the mind refuses to let go of the imagined balance sheet. It keeps calculating what was given versus what was received. It replays conversations, missed opportunities, betrayals, and losses. Each memory strengthens the feeling that something is owed. This emotional accounting creates a loop where the past remains active, draining energy from the present. Buddhist teachings highlight that suffering often comes from insisting reality should be different from what it is. When the mind clings to fairness as a requirement, it enters a constant battle with events that cannot be reversed. The world continues moving, but attention stays anchored to grievances. Movement becomes impossible because energy is tied up in protest rather than participation. This attachment also distorts perception. When you believe life treated you unfairly, you start interpreting new situations through that lens. Neutral events appear threatening. Minor setbacks feel like confirmation of a larger injustice. Success becomes difficult to trust because it feels temporary, as if balance will soon be restored through loss. The nervous system remains on edge, scanning for proof that fairness has not returned. Believing life should be fair can also freeze compassion. When resentment dominates, empathy narrows. You may struggle to celebrate others because their success highlights your pain. You may withdraw from relationships because trust feels risky. The world becomes divided into those who benefited from unfairness and those who suffered from it. This division isolates you, reinforcing the sense of being alone against a system that never recognized your efforts. Another hidden consequence is how resentment shapes identity. You may begin to see yourself primarily as someone who was wronged. This identity offers a strange comfort because it explains why things feel heavy. Letting go of resentment would mean facing uncertainty about who you are without that narrative. So the mind holds onto the story, even though it hurts, because it provides structure. Attachment to fairness also interferes with gratitude. It becomes difficult to notice what is working because attention gravitates toward what was denied. Even moments of joy can feel undeserved or fragile. The mind whispers that it will be taken away to restore balance. This anticipation of loss prevents full engagement with the present. The belief in fairness can also discourage risk-taking. If past efforts did not produce expected results, you may hesitate to try again. The logic becomes defensive. Why invest energy when outcomes are unpredictable? This cautious stance reduces exposure to disappointment, but it also reduces exposure to opportunity. Life becomes smaller, safer, and more stagnant. Buddhist insight offers a different perspective. Instead of asking whether life is fair, it asks whether clinging to fairness reduces suffering. This shift moves the focus from judging reality to understanding the impact of your response. It does not deny that injustice exists. It acknowledges pain without turning it into a permanent anchor. Letting go of the illusion of fairness does not mean approving of harm or ignoring inequality. It means releasing the expectation that the universe operates according to personal standards. This release creates space for practical action. Instead of replaying what cannot be changed, you can respond to what is possible now. Energy returns to the present, where influence exists. One way to loosen this attachment is by recognizing the complexity of causes. Every event emerges from countless conditions, many of which are invisible. A promotion someone received may involve timing, connections, health, and luck, in addition to effort. A loss you experienced may involve factors no one controlled. Understanding this complexity softens the narrative of deliberate injustice. Another step is practicing acceptance without resignation. Acceptance means acknowledging reality as it is, not as you wish it had been. It does not prevent you from seeking improvement or justice where possible. It simply removes the inner fight that drains energy. When you stop arguing with the past, attention becomes available for building the future. Forgiveness also plays a role, not as a moral obligation, but as an emotional release. Holding on to resentment keeps the wound active. Forgiveness allows healing by disengaging from the story that sustains pain. This does not excuse harmful actions. It frees you from carrying them indefinitely. Releasing fairness expectations can also restore curiosity. When you are no longer fixated on what should have happened, you become open to what might happen. You start exploring new directions instead of defending old grievances. Life regains a sense of movement. Gratitude becomes easier as well. Without the comparison to an ideal outcome, you can appreciate what is present. Gratitude does not erase loss, but it balances perception. It reminds you that existence contains both hardship and possibility. Another benefit is renewed empathy. When resentment softens, you see that everyone carries struggles you cannot fully see. The person who seems fortunate may be dealing with hidden pain. This awareness reconnects you to humanity, reducing isolation. The dissolution of fairness attachment also changes how you approach goals. Instead of expecting guaranteed rewards, you pursue what feels meaningful regardless of outcome. Effort becomes an expression of values rather than a transaction with fate. This mindset reduces anxiety because success is no longer the only acceptable result. Resilience grows from this shift. When setbacks occur, they are experienced as part of life's unpredictability rather than evidence of injustice. You recover faster because you are not burdened by the question of why you deserved it. You focus on adaptation instead of blame. As resentment fades, emotional energy returns. You may notice a sense of lightness that was absent for years. Decisions become clearer because they are not filtered through bitterness. Relationships improve because you are not projecting unresolved pain onto others. Letting go of fairness expectations also reveals how much time was spent waiting for validation that may never come. You stop hoping that someone will acknowledge the injustice and restore balance. You give yourself permission to move forward without closure. This movement does not erase the past, it integrates it. Your experiences become part of your story without dictating your direction. You carry lessons instead of wounds. Over time, a quiet peace emerges. Not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of no longer fighting reality. You become more responsive to what is happening now, less preoccupied with what should have happened before. As resentment loosens and the demand for fairness fades, the heart begins to feel lighter. The past no longer has the same grip, and the present becomes easier to enter without carrying a silent argument. Yet in that openness, another quiet desire often takes shape. It is not about recognition, control, or justice this time. It is about feelings. A longing for a state of peace that never breaks, a happiness that does not fluctuate, a calm that stays no matter what happens. At first, this desire feels innocent. After all, who would not want lasting peace? But slowly, it turns into a restless chase, because every pleasant emotion fades, and every return of discomfort feels like failure. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from trying to feel good all the time. You wake up hoping the heaviness will be gone. When it is, you feel relief mixed with fear that it will return. When it does return, disappointment sets in, as if something went wrong. The mind starts searching for the reason the good feeling disappeared. It replays conversations, analyzes habits, questions decisions, looking for a mistake that caused the shift. Instead of accepting that emotions naturally rise and fall, it treats every dip as a problem to solve. This craving for a permanent emotional state is deeply rooted in the human desire for stability. Pleasant feelings feel safe, painful feelings feel threatening. So the mind tries to secure the pleasant and eliminate the painful. But emotions are not objects that can be stored. They are processes, movements of energy shaped by countless conditions. They respond to sleep, food, stress, memories, environment, relationships, physical health, and even the weather. Expecting them to remain constant is like expecting the sky to hold the same color all day. Buddhist teaching points to impermanence as the fundamental nature of experience. Everything that arises will pass. This includes joy, sadness, excitement, boredom, clarity, confusion, confidence, doubt. When the mind resists this truth, it creates tension. It clings to pleasant states and rejects unpleasant ones, turning natural fluctuations into emotional turbulence. The search for permanent happiness often leads to constant self-monitoring. You check how you feel, then check again, as if scanning for signs of stability. When you feel calm, you worry about losing it. When you feel anxious, you worry about staying stuck there. This vigilance keeps the nervous system activated, preventing genuine relaxation. Peace becomes something you chase rather than something you allow. Another consequence is emotional avoidance. If you believe happiness must be constant, you may try to avoid situations that could trigger discomfort. Difficult conversations are postponed, risks are minimized. Boundaries are softened to prevent conflict. You might withdraw from challenges that could lead to growth because they also contain uncertainty. Life becomes smaller, shaped around preserving a fragile sense of calm. This avoidance creates stagnation. Without new experiences, there is less opportunity for learning, connection, and fulfillment. The life you hoped would feel peaceful begins to feel empty instead. The mind interprets this emptiness as another failure, reinforcing the belief that something is missing. Craving a permanent emotional state also distorts how you interpret normal human struggles. Sadness after loss becomes a sign that healing is not happening. Anxiety before a new step becomes evidence of weakness. Anger in response to injustice becomes something to suppress rather than understand. Emotions that could guide you instead become enemies to eliminate. Over time, this attitude can lead to a disconnection from your own experience. Instead of feeling emotions fully, you try to control them, manage them, or push them away. The surface may appear calm, but underneath there is pressure building from unacknowledged feelings. When that pressure eventually releases, it can feel overwhelming, reinforcing the fear that emotions are dangerous. The craving for constant happiness is also fueled by comparison. You see others presenting images of joy, success, or peace, and you assume they have achieved something permanent. This perception strengthens the belief that you are falling behind emotionally. In reality, everyone experiences fluctuations, but most people show only selected moments. Buddhist practice encourages a different relationship with emotions. Instead of clinging or resisting, you observe them as passing experiences. When joy arises, you appreciate it without trying to hold it. When sadness appears, you allow it without assuming it will last forever. This approach reduces fear because emotions are no longer treated as permanent conditions. Learning to sit with discomfort is particularly important. Discomfort often contains information about unmet needs, unresolved grief, or areas requiring attention. When you stop treating it as an enemy, it becomes a teacher. You begin to understand your inner landscape more clearly, which leads to wiser choices. Another insight is that happiness itself is not a single emotion, but a broader sense of well-being that includes many states. Peace can coexist with sadness. Contentment can exist alongside uncertainty. Strength can be present even when fear arises. When you stop demanding pure positivity, you allow a richer emotional life to unfold. Letting go of the search for permanent happiness also frees you from disappointment when good moments end. Instead of interpreting the end as loss, you see it as completion. Each experience has its natural arc. Trying to extend it beyond its course only creates tension. This shift also deepens gratitude. When you accept that pleasant states are temporary, you savor them more fully while they are present. You stop taking them for granted. You stop postponing appreciation until conditions are perfect. Another benefit is increased resilience. When difficult emotions arise, you do not panic because you trust they will change. This trust reduces the urge to escape through distractions or harmful habits. You stay present long enough for the wave to pass. Craving permanence often masks a deeper fear of uncertainty. If happiness could be locked in place, the future would feel safe. But safety built on control is fragile. Safety built on adaptability is stronger. When you accept that emotions will change, you invest in your ability to navigate change rather than prevent it. This adaptability also improves decision-making. You stop waiting to feel perfectly confident before acting. You recognize that confidence often grows through action, not before it. You become willing to move forward even when feelings are mixed. Relationships also benefit from this shift. You no longer expect others to maintain your emotional stability. You appreciate their presence without making them responsible for your happiness. This reduces pressure and allows connection to be more genuine. Another important realization is that meaning often arises from engaging with life's full spectrum, not just its pleasant parts. Growth, compassion, and wisdom frequently develop through challenges. When you stop rejecting discomfort entirely, you become open to the lessons it carries. Over time, the obsession with constant happiness softens into a quieter contentment. This contentment is not dependent on mood. It is rooted in acceptance of reality as it unfolds. It allows you to experience joy without clinging and pain without despair. This transformation does not remove emotional ups and downs. It changes your relationship to them. You become less reactive, more observant, more grounded. You learn that stability does not come from controlling emotions, but from understanding their nature. As the chase for constant happiness begins to loosen, life feels less like a performance of emotions and more like a space you can actually breathe in. You stop demanding that every day feel amazing, and you start allowing experience to unfold as it is. But just when the pressure to feel good all the time fades, another pressure can quietly step forward. It is not about feelings anymore. It is about doing, about producing, about proving your existence through results. The mind begins to whisper that peace is acceptable only if it is earned, that rest must be justified, that worth must be demonstrated through output. Without noticing it, you move from chasing permanent happiness to chasing permanent productivity. There is a particular heaviness in waking up already feeling behind. Before your feet touch the floor, a list appears in your mind, things you must finish, improve, respond to, fix, optimize, complete. Even moments meant for rest carry an undercurrent of guilt. If you sit still, you feel wasteful. If you relax, you feel undeserving. If you slow down, anxiety creeps in, as if time itself is slipping away and taking your value with it. This attachment forms gradually. Productivity is praised in modern life. Being busy is treated as proof of importance. Achievements become identity markers. Over time, you may start believing that what you accomplish is who you are. If you produce more, you feel significant. If you produce less, you feel invisible. The connection becomes so tight that slowing down feels like erasing yourself. Equating value with output creates a fragile sense of worth because output fluctuates. Energy changes, circumstances shift, health varies, inspiration comes and goes. When productivity drops, the sense of self drops with it. You may experience ordinary fatigue as personal failure. A quiet day feels like regression. The nervous system stays activated because it believes rest threatens identity. This pattern often leads to burnout, not because you lack discipline, but because you treat yourself as a machine rather than a living being. Machines can run continuously if maintained. Humans cannot. They require cycles of activity and recovery. Ignoring this rhythm produces exhaustion that no amount of motivation can fix. Burnout carries a strange emotional mix. You feel tired but unable to stop. You feel empty but pressured to keep going. Tasks that once felt meaningful become mechanical. Even success loses its flavor because there is no time to absorb it before the next demand arrives. Life becomes a series of checkboxes rather than experiences. Buddhist insight highlights that identity built on impermanent conditions will always produce anxiety. Productivity is impermanent. It depends on time, health, resources, and opportunity. When identity rests on something unstable, fear becomes constant. You worry about losing your edge, falling behind, becoming irrelevant. The mind rarely relaxes because it is guarding a temporary structure. Another consequence is how productivity attachment reshapes relationships. You may start viewing people through a lens of efficiency. Conversations become interruptions. Connection becomes something scheduled rather than felt. You may withdraw from social life because it does not contribute directly to goals. Over time, isolation grows, even while achievements increase. This attachment also distorts self-compassion. You become harsher toward yourself than you would ever be toward a friend. Mistakes are treated as evidence of inadequacy. Limitations are treated as flaws rather than realities. The inner voice becomes demanding, rarely satisfied, always pushing for more. Equating worth with output can also disconnect you from intrinsic motivation. Activities once enjoyed for their own sake become tools for achievement. Creativity becomes performance. Curiosity becomes strategy. Even personal growth can turn into a competition with an invisible version of yourself that is always supposed to be better. The body often signals when this pattern goes too far. Chronic tension, sleep problems, irritability, loss of concentration, emotional numbness. These are not signs of weakness. They are messages that the system is overwhelmed. Ignoring them only deepens the cycle. Buddhist practice encourages recognizing that existence itself has value independent of productivity. Your worth does not increase when you accomplish something, nor decrease when you rest. You are not a project to be completed. You are a living process, unfolding moment by moment. When this understanding sinks in, the pressure to constantly prove yourself begins to soften. Letting go of productivity as identity does not mean abandoning effort or ambition. It means shifting the motivation behind them. Work becomes an expression of engagement rather than a defense against worthlessness. You act because it feels meaningful, not because you fear disappearing. This shift also restores the ability to rest without guilt. Rest becomes part of the rhythm of life rather than a reward for exhaustion. You begin to see that recovery is not wasted time. It is what makes sustained effort possible. Without it, even the strongest drive collapses. Another benefit is renewed presence. When you are not mentally racing toward the next task, you can actually inhabit the moment you are in. Meals taste fuller, conversations feel deeper. Simple activities regain texture. Life stops feeling like a hallway you rush through to reach some distant room. Releasing this attachment also changes how you interpret setbacks. Instead of seeing them as threats to identity, you view them as normal variations in the process. This reduces panic and increases adaptability. You can adjust without self-attack. Creativity often returns as well. When output is no longer tied to worth, experimentation becomes safer. You can try things without needing them to succeed. This openness allows ideas to emerge that rigid productivity could never access. Relationships benefit too. Without the constant pressure to optimize time, you become more available. You listen without checking the clock. You show up without calculating efficiency. This presence strengthens bonds that productivity alone cannot create. Letting go of productivity attachment also reveals how much of your life was driven by fear of insignificance. When that fear softens, you may feel a surprising sense of relief. You no longer need to outrun silence or stillness. You can sit with yourself without feeling like something is wrong. Another realization emerges. Value is not only found in visible achievements, it exists in kindness, attention, patience, honesty, and the quiet ways you impact others without noticing. These contributions rarely appear on lists, but they shape the texture of life. As burnout fades, energy begins to feel different. Not frantic, not forced, but steady. You act when action is needed and rest when rest is needed. Productivity becomes sustainable because it is balanced rather than driven by fear. This balance also allows you to redefine success. Success stops being the accumulation of completed tasks and becomes alignment between how you live and what you care about. You measure your days not only by what you produced, but by how you showed up. The emptiness that once followed achievements starts to dissolve because fulfillment is no longer postponed until the next milestone. It exists within the process itself. You experience satisfaction while creating, learning, connecting, and contributing, not only when the result is finished. Over time, identity shifts from being a producer to being a participant in life. You are still capable, still driven, still engaged, but not trapped. Work becomes part of who you are, not the entire definition. As the grip of productivity begins to loosen, life stops feeling like a race against your own exhaustion. You start seeing that worth does not rise and fall with how much you produce. There is relief in that realization, a sense that you can exist without constantly proving yourself. But just when the pressure to outperform your past self fades, another pressure can quietly take its place. It shifts your attention outward instead of inward. The mind begins scanning the lives of others, measuring, comparing, calculating distances between where you are and where they appear to be. Without noticing it, your direction starts bending towards someone else's path. There is a subtle ache that comes from feeling behind, even when no one has declared a finish line. You see someone your age who seems more settled, more successful, more confident, more fulfilled. You see someone younger achieving things you once hoped to achieve. You see someone older who appears freer than you feel. Each comparison creates a tiny fracture in your sense of sufficiency. Alone, these fractures are small. Over time, they accumulate into a quiet belief that your life is unfolding incorrectly. Clinging to comparison traps attention in a loop that never ends because there will always be someone ahead in some area. The mind selects specific traits, ignores context, and constructs a narrative of deficiency. It rarely considers the unseen parts of other people's lives, the struggles, sacrifices, doubts, and trade-offs that do not appear on the surface. Comparison is selective perception disguised as objective evaluation. This attachment often begins as motivation. Seeing what others accomplish can inspire growth. But when inspiration turns into measurement, it becomes corrosive. Instead of asking what resonates with your own values, you start asking how you rank. Direction becomes reactive rather than intentional. You move not because something calls to you, but because you fear falling behind. The problem is that comparison assumes all lives follow the same map. It treats success as a standardized path, rather than a personal journey shaped by unique conditions. In reality, people start from different places, carry different responsibilities, encounter different opportunities, and respond to challenges in different ways. Measuring across these differences creates distorted conclusions. Buddhist understanding emphasizes that each life unfolds through a web of causes and conditions that cannot be replicated. Your experiences, relationships, timing, and internal tendencies form a combination that no one else shares. When you compare yourself to others without accounting for these conditions, you are comparing incomplete pictures. Comparison also narrows perception of your own progress. Achievements that once felt meaningful lose their impact because they are overshadowed by someone else's milestone. You may reach goals you once dreamed about and still feel unsatisfied because they do not match the scale of what you see around you. Gratitude fades, replaced by a restless sense that it is not enough. This attachment can also create hesitation. If you believe your path must resemble someone else's to be valid, you may suppress instincts that point in a different direction. Opportunities aligned with your interests might be dismissed because they do not look impressive from the outside. You delay choices while waiting for external confirmation that your path is acceptable. Over time, authentic direction becomes harder to hear. The inner voice that once guided you grows faint under the noise of other people's trajectories. You may feel lost, not because you lack options, but because you are trying to navigate using borrowed maps. Clinging to comparison also affects how you interpret setbacks. When something goes wrong, the mind quickly checks where others are. If they appear unaffected, your pain intensifies because it feels like proof of inadequacy. If they experience similar struggles, there is relief, not because suffering is shared, but because the ranking feels restored. This reveals how deeply comparison shapes emotional responses. Another hidden effect is envy, an emotion often misunderstood. Envy is not just wanting what someone else has, it is the pain of believing their success diminishes your own potential. When envy dominates, it becomes difficult to celebrate others genuinely. Their achievements feel like reminders of your perceived shortcomings. Comparison can also lead to imitation. You may adopt habits, goals, or lifestyles that do not truly fit you because they worked for someone else. This imitation often leads to frustration because it ignores personal differences. What energizes one person may drain another. What suits one temperament may conflict with another's nature. Buddhist practice encourages turning attention inward, not as withdrawal from the world, but as reconnection with direct experience. Instead of asking how your life compares, you ask how it feels from the inside. Are your actions aligned with what matters to you? Are you growing in ways that feel meaningful? Are you living according to values rather than rankings? Letting go of comparison also restores appreciation for diversity of paths. You begin to see that success has many forms: stability, creativity, service, exploration, connection, and wisdom are all valid expressions of a life well lived. There is no universal timeline that determines when each must appear. This shift also reduces urgency driven by fear. You stop rushing decisions to catch up. You move at a pace that allows reflection and clarity. Progress becomes sustainable because it is not fueled by panic. Another benefit is renewed curiosity. Without the need to measure constantly, you can explore interests for their own sake. You can try things without worrying about how they look. This openness often leads to discoveries that comparison would have prevented. Relationships improve as well. When you are not secretly evaluating where you stand, you can engage with others more authentically. You listen without calculating. You share without competing. Connection deepens because it is no longer filtered through hierarchy. Releasing comparison also reveals strengths that were previously overlooked. You may notice qualities that do not fit conventional definitions of success, but contribute to your life in meaningful ways. Patience, empathy, resilience, creativity, humor, and presence rarely appear in rankings, yet they shape experience profoundly. Another important insight is that direction becomes clearer when you stop looking sideways. Attention returns to what is directly in front of you. Decisions are based on relevance rather than appearance. You begin to trust that your path will unfold in ways that make sense for you, even if they do not resemble anyone else's. This trust reduces anxiety about timing. You stop interpreting delays as failure. You understand that readiness is not measured by age or milestones, but by alignment of conditions. What comes later can still be meaningful. What comes earlier is not automatically better. Comparison also loses power when you recognize the impermanence of external markers. Status, income, recognition, and roles change over time. Building identity on these markers creates instability because they are temporary. When you anchor identity in values and presence, it remains steady even as circumstances shift. Another transformation is how you view others' success. Instead of seeing it as a threat, you see it as evidence of possibility. Their achievements do not reduce your potential. They demonstrate what can be created under certain conditions. This perspective turns envy into inspiration without pressure. Letting go of comparison does not isolate you from society. It allows you to participate without losing yourself. You can collaborate, learn, and contribute without constantly measuring your position. As authentic direction strengthens, motivation becomes intrinsic. You act because the action itself feels meaningful, not because it improves your standing. This intrinsic motivation is more resilient because it does not depend on external benchmarks. Over time, a quiet confidence emerges. Not the loud confidence of proving superiority, but the calm confidence of knowing where you stand with yourself. This confidence allows you to move through life without constant validation. Freedom from comparison also reduces fear of judgment when you are no longer evaluating yourself through others' eyes. Their opinions lose their ability to control your choices. You become more willing to take unconventional paths if they feel true. Another benefit is increased presence. Without the mental habit of measuring, you can immerse yourself in what you are doing. Activities become experiences rather than steps in a competition. Life regains texture and depth. As this attachment dissolves, a deeper compassion often appears. You see that everyone struggles with insecurity at times, even those who seem ahead. This understanding softens harsh judgments toward both yourself and others. As the habit of comparing yourself to others begins to fade, your attention finally stops scanning sideways and starts turning inward. There is relief in no longer measuring your life against someone else's timeline. But when the noise of comparison quiets, something else often becomes louder. The mind begins replaying moments from the past with a new intensity. Words you wish you had not said, chances you wish you had taken, decisions that led to consequences you never intended. Without the distraction of comparison, regret steps forward, not as a passing emotion, but as a constant presence that insists on being heard. There is a heavy kind of silence that comes from living with regret. It sits in the background of ordinary days, waiting for moments of stillness to resurface. A familiar scene, a song, a smell, or a conversation can trigger a memory, and suddenly you are back there again, reliving the same event as if time never moved. The body reacts as though the mistake is happening now. The chest tightens, the stomach drops, the mind rushes in with commentary about what you should have done differently. Attachment to regret often disguises itself as responsibility. It feels like proof that you care, that you have learned, that you are morally aware. The mind tells you that if you stop replaying the mistake, you might repeat it, so it keeps revisiting the past as a form of vigilance. But instead of creating wisdom, this repetition drains energy and keeps you emotionally anchored to something that cannot be changed. Regret becomes self-punishment when you believe suffering is the price for redemption. You may feel that you deserve to carry the weight as a reminder. Letting go might feel like minimizing the harm or disrespecting those affected. This belief turns healing into betrayal, as if moving forward would erase accountability. Buddhist insight distinguishes between wise reflection and clinging. Reflection looks at the past to understand causes and consequences, then returns to the present. Clinging stays in the past long after understanding has been reached. It keeps reopening the wound without allowing it to close. The difference is subtle but important. Reflection frees, clinging binds. Replaying mistakes also creates a distorted sense of identity. You may start seeing yourself primarily through the lens of what went wrong. A single decision becomes the defining story of who you are. Even positive qualities get overshadowed by that narrative. This narrow view prevents growth because it locks you into a fixed image that feels impossible to escape. Another effect of regret attachment is how it shapes expectations for the future. If you believe you failed once in a particular area, you may assume failure is inevitable again. This assumption reduces willingness to try. Opportunities pass by not because you lack ability, but because you fear repeating history. Regret can also intensify perfectionism. Determined to avoid past mistakes, you may try to control every detail of future decisions. This hyper-caution creates tension and delays action. The desire to avoid error becomes stronger than the desire to move forward, resulting in stagnation. Emotionally, regret often carries layers. Beneath the surface sadness, there may be guilt, shame, anger, or grief. Guilt focuses on actions that caused harm. Shame targets the self as flawed. Anger may be directed at circumstances or other people. Grief acknowledges loss. When regret remains unexamined, these layers blend together, creating a heavy emotional fog. Buddhist practice encourages acknowledging these emotions without identifying with them. You can feel guilt without becoming a guilty person. You can feel shame without concluding you are unworthy. Emotions are experiences, not definitions. This perspective allows space for healing. Forgiveness plays a central role in releasing regret, especially self-forgiveness. This is not about excusing behavior. It is about recognizing that human beings act with limited awareness at any given moment. You made decisions based on the information, maturity, and emotional state you had at the time. Holding your past self to your current understanding is unrealistic. Letting go of regret also requires accepting that the past cannot be edited. The mind searches for alternative scenarios because it hopes to find a version where the outcome was better. But this search is endless because it operates in imagination, not reality. Closure comes not from finding the perfect revision, but from acknowledging the finality of what happened. Another helpful approach is making amends where possible. If a mistake affected someone else, sincere apology or corrective action can transform regret into responsibility. When repair is not possible, contributing positively in other areas can restore a sense of balance. Attachment to regret can also disconnect you from present relationships. If your attention is absorbed by past errors, you may struggle to fully engage with people who are here now. They sense the distance, even if they do not know its source. Releasing regret allows you to offer presence rather than distraction. The body often holds regret physically. Chronic tension, fatigue, headaches, or heaviness can reflect unprocessed emotions. Practices that reconnect you with physical experience, such as mindful breathing or movement, can help release stored stress. Understanding impermanence also softens regret. The person who made the mistake is not identical to who you are now. Your thoughts, values, and awareness have evolved. Holding yourself hostage to a past version ignores this transformation. Another important realization is that mistakes often become sources of wisdom. Experiences that once felt purely negative may later guide compassionate action, creativity, or resilience. When you stop seeing them only as failures, their meaning shifts. Regret attachment can also lead to isolation. Feeling unworthy, you may withdraw from opportunities or relationships, believing you must first fix yourself. This isolation reinforces negative beliefs because there are fewer experiences to challenge them. Releasing regret opens the door to re-engagement. You begin participating again, even if uncertainty remains. Movement replaces rumination. Experience replaces speculation. There is also freedom in acknowledging that no life is free of mistakes. Imperfection is universal. Recognizing this reduces the sense of being uniquely flawed. You are part of the human condition, not outside it. As regret loosens, emotional space appears. This space can feel unfamiliar because you are used to carrying weight. Without the constant replay, silence emerges. In that silence, new possibilities can be sensed. Hope begins to return, not as blind optimism, but as openness to change. You see that the future is not predetermined by the past. Choices made now can shape outcomes in ways you could not foresee before. Self-compassion grows as well. You learn to treat yourself with the same understanding you would offer someone else in pain. This kindness does not weaken accountability. It strengthens resilience by reducing internal hostility. Over time, the past becomes integrated rather than avoided or obsessed over. Memories remain, but they no longer dominate attention. They are chapters, not the entire story. As the weight of regret begins to loosen, the past no longer feels like a courtroom where you are both the accused and the judge. You stop replaying old mistakes as if punishment could rewrite history. There is space again, a quiet opening where something new could begin. Yet, just as movement becomes possible, another invisible condition appears. The mind says you cannot move forward yet, not until everything makes sense, not until the unanswered questions are resolved, not until you feel at peace about what happened. Without realizing it, you place your life on hold, waiting for a kind of emotional permission that may never arrive. There is a particular stillness that comes from waiting for closure. It feels responsible, even mature. You tell yourself you are not avoiding life, only pausing until you understand it. But the pause stretches into months, sometimes years. The unanswered conversation, the broken relationship, the unfinished chapter, the sudden ending with no explanation. These become checkpoints your mind refuses to pass. It insists that clarity must come first, as if forward motion without resolution would be reckless or dishonest. Craving closure often begins with the need for meaning. When something ends abruptly or painfully, the mind searches for a narrative that explains it. It wants a reason that fits neatly, something that transforms chaos into order. If that explanation is not available, the mind keeps circling the event, hoping that one more thought will unlock the answer. This search can feel purposeful, but it often becomes repetitive rather than illuminating. The difficulty is that not all experiences offer neat conclusions. People leave without explaining. Opportunities disappear without warning. Events unfold in ways that defy logic. Expecting life to provide tidy endings can create frustration because reality does not follow storytelling rules. It moves forward regardless of whether the story feels complete. Attachment to closure also reflects a deeper discomfort with uncertainty. The unknown feels unsafe because it lacks boundaries. If you do not understand why something happened, it feels like it could happen again at any time. So the mind treats explanation as protection. Once the cause is identified, you believe you can prevent future pain. Buddhist teaching suggests that uncertainty is not a flaw in existence, but one of its defining qualities. Life unfolds through countless variables, many beyond personal control. Seeking absolute certainty in such a system creates tension. Peace arises not from eliminating uncertainty, but from learning to coexist with it. Waiting for closure can also preserve emotional attachment to the past. As long as questions remain unanswered, the connection feels alive. Letting go might feel like abandoning the significance of what happened. The mind may resist closure because it fears emptiness afterward. If the chapter truly ends, who are you without it? Another aspect is the belief that healing requires understanding. While insight can be helpful, healing often begins before full comprehension. Emotional recovery comes from engaging with the present, building new experiences, and allowing time to reshape perspective. Understanding may deepen later, but it is not always the starting point. Craving closure can also delay forgiveness. If you are waiting for an apology, acknowledgement, or explanation from someone else, your ability to release resentment depends on their actions. This places your emotional freedom in hands you cannot control. When the apology never comes, healing stalls. In relationships, this attachment can keep you tethered to people who are no longer part of your life. You replay conversations, imagine future encounters where everything is finally resolved, rehearse speeches you may never deliver. The relationship continues internally even after it has ended externally. Closure can also become a condition for self-trust. You may feel hesitant to make new commitments until the past feels settled. Fear of repeating unresolved patterns keeps you cautious. This caution can protect you from immediate pain, but also prevents new growth. Buddhist practice emphasizes direct experience rather than conceptual resolution. You learn to sit with the sensations of uncertainty, the tightness in the chest, the restless thoughts, the urge to solve, without acting on them. Over time, this tolerance reduces the urgency to fix everything before moving. Another important insight is that closure is often created, not received. You can decide that a chapter has ended even without external confirmation. This decision does not erase memories. It acknowledges that continuing to wait serves no purpose. Letting go of closure does not mean abandoning reflection. It means recognizing when reflection has turned into rumination. You can honor the importance of what happened while allowing yourself to step forward. Movement itself often brings clarity that waiting cannot. New experiences provide context that changes how you see the past. What once felt unresolved may gradually lose its intensity as your life expands beyond it. Craving closure can also narrow identity. You may define yourself by the unresolved event, seeing it as the central theme of your story. Releasing the need for resolution allows other aspects of your identity to emerge. Another consequence is how closure attachment affects time perception. When you are waiting for answers, the present feels temporary, like a hallway you must pass through to reach a final room. This prevents full engagement with current opportunities. Letting go restores presence. You begin to treat today as a complete experience rather than a placeholder. This shift can bring unexpected moments of meaning, even while uncertainty remains. There is also freedom in accepting that some questions will remain unanswered. Instead of seeing this as failure, you recognize it as part of human limitation. Not everything can be known, and not everything needs to be known for life to continue. As closure loses its grip, curiosity replaces fixation. You become open to new directions rather than anchored to old puzzles. The mind relaxes because it no longer carries the burden of solving the unsolvable. Compassion toward yourself grows as well. You stop blaming yourself for not having perfect understanding. You accept that you did what you could with the awareness available at the time. Over time, the past integrates into your story without demanding constant attention. It becomes one influence among many rather than the central axis around which everything revolves. As this attachment dissolves, you may notice another subtle barrier, one that looks like safety rather than hesitation. The mind may begin to cling to comfort, disguised as stability, preferring familiar routines even when they quietly limit growth, creating a cage that feels secure but prevents expansion. As the need for closure begins to loosen, you stop waiting for the past to give you permission to live. The unanswered questions lose some of their urgency, and the future starts to feel reachable again. But just when movement becomes possible, another attachment can quietly tighten its grip. It does not look like fear. It looks like safety. It sounds like wisdom. It feels like protecting what you have built. The mind begins telling you that staying where you are is not avoidance, it is stability. Not hesitation, but responsibility. Yet beneath that reassuring language, something subtle is happening. Life is no longer expanding. It is being carefully contained. There is a calm that feels peaceful on the surface, but heavy underneath. Your days become predictable, your choices familiar, your environment controlled. Nothing is dramatically wrong, yet something feels muted. You are not suffering intensely, but you are not fully alive either. Comfort has settled in so deeply that you stop questioning it. You call it balance. You call it maturity. You call it knowing what works. But part of you senses that the comfort is no longer supporting growth, it is preventing it. Attachment to comfort disguised as stability often develops after periods of chaos or pain. When life has been unpredictable, stability feels like relief. Routine becomes a sanctuary, familiarity becomes a shield. Over time, the relief turns into dependency. You begin structuring your life to avoid anything that might disturb the calm you fought so hard to regain. What started as healing becomes avoidance. Buddhist teaching points to a subtle truth. Clinging to pleasant conditions creates suffering because all conditions change. Comfort is not permanent. The attempt to freeze it in place requires constant effort. You start saying no to opportunities not because they are wrong for you, but because they might disrupt the equilibrium. Risk becomes threatening, even when it carries potential for growth. This attachment also narrows perception. You stop exploring new ideas, meeting new people, or trying unfamiliar activities because the known world feels safer. Curiosity fades, the horizon shrinks. Life becomes a loop rather than a journey. Each day resembles the one before, creating a sense of time passing without depth. The safe zone becomes a cage gradually, not suddenly. At first, you notice small signs: reluctance to step outside routines, discomfort when plans change, resistance to invitations that involve uncertainty. Later, the signs become more pronounced. You may feel anxious about transitions, even positive ones. Opportunities that once excited you now feel exhausting. Another hidden aspect is how comfort can mask dissatisfaction. You may convince yourself that wanting more is unrealistic or ungrateful. You lower expectations to match your environment. Dreams become smaller because pursuing them would require leaving the familiar behind. This self-protection prevents disappointment but also blocks fulfillment. Attachment to stability can also affect identity. You may begin defining yourself by roles or routines that feel secure, even if they no longer reflect who you are becoming. Changing those roles would mean confronting uncertainty about who you are without them, so you maintain them, even when they feel restrictive. Relationships can be shaped by this attachment as well. You may stay connected to people who are comfortable rather than those who challenge you to grow. Conversations become repetitive. Emotional depth decreases. The connection persists because it is familiar, not because it is nourishing. Comfort attachment also influences decision-making. Choices are evaluated based on how much they preserve the current state, rather than how much they align with values or aspirations. This can lead to missed opportunities that only become visible in hindsight. There is also a physiological component. The nervous system adapts to predictability. It prefers known patterns because they require less energy to process. Breaking those patterns triggers discomfort, which the mind interprets as danger rather than growth. Understanding this response helps reduce self-judgment when stepping outside comfort feels difficult. Buddhist practice encourages gradual exposure to change rather than dramatic leaps. Small disruptions to routine can rebuild flexibility. Trying something new in manageable ways teaches the nervous system that unfamiliar does not equal unsafe. Over time, tolerance for uncertainty increases. Another important insight is distinguishing between healthy stability and stagnation. Stability supports growth by providing a secure base. Stagnation resists growth by preserving conditions that no longer serve you. The difference lies in whether your environment encourages expansion or restricts it. Letting go of comfort attachment also requires redefining safety. True safety comes from adaptability, not from controlling circumstances. When you trust your ability to navigate change, you do not need to avoid it. This trust grows through experience, not theory. Exploration can begin with curiosity rather than ambition. You do not need a grand plan to step outside the cage. Small acts of openness, learning something new, visiting unfamiliar places, initiating conversations, revisiting forgotten interests, can reawaken a sense of possibility. As comfort loosens, you may feel both excitement and fear. This mixture is natural. It signals that you are leaving autopilot and re-engaging with life's unpredictability. Fear does not mean the decision is wrong. It often indicates that you are expanding beyond previous limits. Another benefit of releasing this attachment is renewed creativity. When you stop confining yourself to established patterns, ideas begin to flow again. Inspiration returns because the mind is exposed to new stimuli. Physical movement can also help break comfort loops. Changing environments, engaging in different activities, or altering routines send signals to the brain that the world is larger than the current pattern. This can reduce the sense of being trapped. Over time, the cage becomes visible. You see how many choices were shaped by avoidance rather than intention. This realization can be uncomfortable, but it also offers freedom because awareness precedes change. Compassion toward yourself remains important. Comfort-seeking developed as protection, not weakness. Acknowledging this prevents shame from replacing stagnation. You can appreciate the role comfort played while still moving beyond it. As the attachment dissolves, energy returns. Life regains movement, variety, and depth. You begin to feel engaged rather than merely secure. Stability becomes something you carry within, not something you must defend externally. As the walls of comfort begin to loosen, life starts moving again. You step beyond routines that once felt like protection and rediscover parts of yourself that had been quiet for too long. There is a sense of fresh air, of possibility returning. But when the cage opens, something unexpected can follow you out. Old pain, once contained by familiarity, now has space to speak. Memories of unfair treatment, betrayal, neglect, or abandonment rise to the surface, not just as events that happened, but as stories about who you became because of them. Without noticing it, the mind begins organizing identity around what was done to you. There is a heavy pull in defining yourself through past wounds. It can feel grounding, as if the pain explains everything that came after. The narrative becomes clear. You were the one who was hurt, the one who endured, the one who survived what others did not understand. This story may contain truth, but when clung to tightly, it stops being a chapter and becomes the entire book. Every new experience is filtered through it. Neutral events feel threatening, kindness feels suspicious, progress feels temporary, as if it could be taken away again. Clinging to emotional narratives often begins as a way to make sense of suffering. When something deeply painful happens, the mind searches for meaning to prevent chaos. Creating a story around the pain gives it structure. It turns raw experience into something that can be remembered, explained, and communicated. This process is natural and sometimes necessary. The problem arises when the story becomes fixed, unable to evolve as you evolve. Buddhist understanding emphasizes that identity is not a solid object, but a process constantly shaped by conditions. When you freeze identity around a moment of injury, you ignore the changes that continue happening within you. Growth becomes difficult because the narrative requires consistency. If you are the one who was wronged, then letting go of anger or resentment can feel like losing part of yourself. Victim identity can also provide a sense of moral clarity. It positions you as the innocent party and others as responsible for the harm. This clarity can feel stabilizing after confusion, but it can also simplify complex situations into rigid categories, preventing deeper understanding. Human interactions are rarely one-dimensional. Holding on to a single interpretation limits perspective. Another reason this attachment persists is that it can attract validation. When people acknowledge your pain, it confirms that what happened mattered. This validation is important, especially if the suffering was ignored or dismissed in the past. However, relying on it continuously can create dependency. You may feel unseen when attention shifts elsewhere, leading to subtle reinforcement of the narrative to keep it alive. Emotional narratives can also influence behavior. You might avoid opportunities that resemble past situations, even when circumstances are different. The mind anticipates repetition of pain and reacts by withdrawing. This protective instinct, while understandable, can reduce openness to experiences that could bring healing or growth. Relationships are particularly affected. If you expect betrayal because it happened before, you may interpret neutral actions as signs of future harm. Trust becomes fragile. You may test others unconsciously, looking for evidence that confirms the narrative. When misunderstandings occur, they reinforce the belief that people cannot be trusted. Clinging to the story of being wronged can also maintain connection to those who caused the pain. Even if they are no longer present, they occupy mental space through the narrative. Your emotional energy remains tied to them. Letting go might feel like releasing the last link to an experience that shaped you, even if that link is painful. Buddhist practice invites observing thoughts and stories as events in the mind rather than absolute truths. When you notice the narrative arising, you can acknowledge it without merging with it. This creates distance between who you are now and the story about who you were. Forgiveness, especially self-directed forgiveness, plays a role in dissolving this attachment. You may blame yourself for not preventing the harm or for reacting in ways you later regret. Releasing this self-blame reduces the emotional charge that keeps the narrative active. Compassion toward your past self is equally important. Recognizing that you did what you could with the awareness you had softens harsh judgments. The past becomes something to care for rather than something to relive. Letting go of victim identity does not mean denying what happened. It means allowing the experience to inform you without defining you. The pain becomes part of your history, not the center of your identity. Another transformation occurs when you begin seeing your resilience rather than only your injury. Surviving difficulty requires strength, adaptability, and courage, even if you did not recognize these qualities at the time. Shifting focus to these aspects changes the narrative from helplessness to capability. Emotional narratives can also obscure present opportunities for joy. If you expect life to mirror past suffering, positive experiences may feel temporary or undeserved. Allowing yourself to enjoy them without suspicion requires releasing the belief that happiness contradicts your story. Mindfulness of emotions helps as well. When anger, sadness, or fear arises, you can feel them directly without attaching them to the narrative. This prevents escalation into full identification with the story. Another insight is recognizing that others also carry unseen narratives. Understanding this can reduce personalization of events. Not everything that hurts you is intentionally directed at you. Sometimes people act from their own pain and confusion. Releasing emotional narratives also restores agency. Instead of seeing yourself as shaped solely by external events, you begin to see how your responses shape your life now. This perspective empowers change because it highlights choices available in the present. Over time, identity becomes more fluid. You are not just the person who was hurt. You are also the person who healed, who learned, who continued living. New experiences add layers that the old narrative cannot contain. There is also peace in recognizing that you do not need to carry the story to honor the past. Memories remain even when attachment fades. What changes is the emotional grip they have on you. As this attachment dissolves, relationships can deepen because you engage with others as they are now, rather than through the lens of past harm. Trust grows gradually, supported by present experience rather than past fear. Energy once used to maintain the narrative becomes available for creativity, connection, and exploration. Life feels less like a reaction to history and more like a direct experience unfolding in real time. As the story of being wronged begins to loosen, the past stops dictating who you must be. You feel lighter, less defined by what happened, more open to what could still unfold. There is space now, a sense that life is not only about healing, but also about creating. Yet, as this openness appears, another attachment can quietly take control of your direction. The mind shifts its focus forward, not toward possibility, but toward a single fixed image of how things must turn out. Instead of being trapped by the past, you become trapped by the future you are trying to force into existence. There is a restless tension that comes from living for results. Every action feels like a test, every effort like an investment that must pay off. You stop asking whether something is meaningful and start asking whether it will work. The present becomes a tool rather than a place to live. Even moments that should feel alive are overshadowed by calculation, by the constant question of whether you are getting closer to the outcome you want. Attachment to outcomes begins with a natural desire for improvement. Goals provide direction. They help organize effort and give structure to time. The problem arises when the goal becomes more important than the process of moving toward it. Instead of guiding you, it starts controlling you. Your mood rises and falls with signs of progress or delay. Satisfaction becomes conditional, always postponed until the final result is secured. Buddhist teaching points to a subtle truth. Suffering often comes not from action itself, but from clinging to what action should produce. When you demand a specific outcome, you narrow reality to a single acceptable scenario. If events unfold differently, frustration appears. This rigidity creates a fragile sense of stability because it depends on factors beyond your control. Obsessing over results also changes how you experience effort. Activities that once felt engaging may begin to feel burdensome because they are no longer valued for their own sake. You endure them rather than participate in them. The joy of learning, creating, or exploring fades because these experiences are reduced to stepping stones. This attachment can lead to procrastination as well. When the outcome feels overwhelmingly important, fear of failure intensifies. You may delay starting because the risk of not achieving the result feels too threatening. Waiting seems safer than confronting the possibility of disappointment. Perfectionism often accompanies outcome fixation. You may believe that only flawless performance can guarantee success. This belief increases pressure and reduces willingness to experiment. Mistakes become intolerable rather than informative. Growth slows because exploration requires accepting imperfection. Relationships can also be affected. You might evaluate people based on how they contribute to your goals rather than appreciating them as individuals. Interactions become transactional, measured by usefulness instead of connection. This reduces emotional depth and creates distance. Another hidden effect is how outcome obsession distorts time perception. The present feels like a temporary phase that must be endured until the desired future arrives. You postpone happiness, telling yourself you will relax once everything is achieved. But when one goal is reached, another quickly replaces it, continuing the cycle. Buddhist practice encourages focusing on intention rather than results. You can commit fully to the quality of your actions without attaching your peace to what follows. This approach restores agency because intention is within your control, while outcomes are influenced by many variables. Letting go of outcome attachment also reduces anxiety about uncertainty. When you accept that results cannot be guaranteed, you stop trying to predict every possibility. This frees mental energy for creativity and presence. Another transformation occurs in how you respond to setbacks. Instead of seeing them as evidence that the goal is slipping away, you view them as information that can refine your approach. Failure becomes feedback rather than identity. Engagement deepens when you return attention to the process. You notice details that were previously ignored, the small improvements, the unexpected insights, the moments of flow when effort feels effortless. These experiences provide intrinsic motivation that does not depend on external success. Curiosity replaces pressure. You become interested in what can be learned rather than obsessed with what must be achieved. This openness often leads to better results because it allows flexibility. Attachment to outcomes can also narrow creativity. When you are fixated on a specific result, you may reject alternative paths that could lead somewhere equally meaningful. Releasing this fixation allows unexpected opportunities to emerge. There is also peace in recognizing that some results are influenced by timing, circumstances, and other people's choices. Accepting this reduces self-blame when things do not go as planned. Another insight is that outcomes are temporary. Even when achieved, they do not provide lasting fulfillment. The satisfaction fades and the mind seeks the next target. Understanding this prevents the illusion that one final achievement will solve everything. Gratitude becomes easier when you focus on process. You appreciate what is happening now rather than waiting for a future reward. This appreciation enriches daily experience. Mindfulness of action strengthens as well. You pay attention to how you do things, not just what you accomplish. This awareness improves quality because it aligns effort with intention. Letting go of outcome attachment also restores resilience. When your sense of worth is not tied to results, setbacks do not threaten your identity. You can adapt without feeling diminished. Over time, motivation shifts from external validation to internal alignment. You act because the action itself expresses your values. This creates a stable foundation that is not shaken by fluctuating results. Relationships improve too because you engage with people without hidden agendas. Connection becomes genuine rather than strategic. Presence deepens as the future loses its grip. You experience moments fully instead of treating them as preparation for something else. Life feels less like a race and more like a series of unfolding experiences. As the obsession with outcomes begins to soften, something changes in the way effort feels. You stop gripping the future like it is the only place where life can finally be safe. You return to the process, to the small steps, to the present moment where real movement happens. The pressure eases, and for a brief moment there is quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from no longer forcing. And then, very often, that quiet feels uncomfortable. When the mind stops chasing results, it suddenly notices what has been underneath all along: a wide space, a blankness, a silence that has no clear shape. For some people, this is the most frightening experience of all, because the mind has been using goals, plans, and outcomes as a way to stay busy, a way to stay filled. When the constant doing relaxes, you come face to face with something that feels like emptiness inside. This is where many people turn back. They run toward distraction, they create new goals, they fill the silence with noise, because the mind misreads emptiness as a threat. It assumes that if there is empty space inside, something is wrong. It thinks emptiness means meaninglessness. It thinks emptiness means losing yourself. It thinks emptiness means falling apart. In Buddhist teaching, emptiness is not a dark hole. It is not nihilism. It is not the belief that nothing matters. Sunyata, often translated as emptiness, points to something very specific: the fact that things do not exist as solid, permanent, independent objects. Everything arises through conditions, everything changes, everything depends on something else. The fear comes because the ego wants solidity, it wants a fixed self, it wants a stable identity and a stable world. But reality does not offer that kind of permanence. So when you begin to see emptiness, you begin to see that the self you have been defending is not as solid as it feels. And that can feel like losing the ground beneath your feet. Yet that is also where liberation begins. The fear of emptiness often starts with the fear of silence. When you sit alone without stimulation, thoughts may slow down, and you might notice a background sensation, a spaciousness you cannot control. The mind rushes to interpret it. It labels it loneliness, void, something missing. But these labels are stories. The raw experience is simply space. The mind has been trained to fear space because space is unpredictable. If you do not fill the inner world with plans, opinions, entertainment, or worry, you might have to feel what is actually there. And what is actually there is not always comfortable at first. You might meet sadness you have avoided. You might meet fatigue you have ignored. You might meet anger you have buried. You might meet a sense of, I don't know who I am without all this. So the mind calls emptiness dangerous, when it is actually honest. Another layer of fear is the belief that emptiness means you will become passive. People worry that if they let go of their identity, their ambition, their goals, their attachments, they will become numb and stop caring. This is a misunderstanding. Buddhist emptiness does not remove energy, it removes delusion. It does not erase motivation, it purifies it. When you stop clinging to a fixed self, you do not become lifeless. You become flexible, you become responsive, you become less trapped by pride, shame, and fear. Emptiness also threatens the mind's habit of control. If everything is dependent on conditions, then no single plan can guarantee outcomes. If the self is fluid, then your identity cannot be protected like a possession. If life is changing, then certainty is impossible. The mind resists because it wants guarantees. That resistance is the suffering. Emptiness itself is not suffering. The refusal to allow emptiness is suffering. This is why confronting emptiness can feel terrifying. It feels like stepping into open air after living in small rooms for years. The body tightens. The mind searches for something to hold. It may create dramatic thoughts like, nothing matters, or I'm lost, or I'm broken. But these are not truths. They are the mind's attempt to rebuild walls quickly. Buddhist practice trains you to stay with the open air long enough to realize it is not harmful. It is spacious, and spaciousness is freedom. To understand this more clearly, consider how clinging works. When you cling to outcomes, you suffer because reality does not obey. When you cling to identity, you suffer because the self changes. When you cling to comfort, you suffer because comfort fades. Emptiness is the insight that everything you cling to is not solid, and when you see that, the grip relaxes. At first, the relaxation feels like loss. Later, it feels like release. The experience of emptiness often shows up as a moment when your usual story disappears. You might be sitting quietly, and suddenly the sense of me is not as loud. You are simply aware. Breathing happens, sounds happen, sensations happen, thoughts come and go like clouds. And the owner of those thoughts is hard to find. This can be unsettling if you have been relying on a strong me to feel safe. But it can also be deeply peaceful, because when the me relaxes, so does the constant pressure to defend, prove, compare, or control. Emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the absence of rigidness. It is the absence of the false belief that things must stay fixed. It is the absence of the idea that your worth depends on a particular role. This is why emptiness is liberation, because the prison was built out of solidity, out of fixed beliefs, out of this must be, out of I am only this. Emptiness breaks the bars. Another misunderstanding is thinking emptiness means nothing has meaning. In Buddhism, meaning is not denied. Meaning is freed from attachment. When you see that everything is changing, you stop demanding that meaning be permanent. You stop trying to lock joy in place. You stop treating love as possession. You stop treating success as identity. You start meeting life as a flowing process rather than a fixed structure. Meaning becomes more alive because it is not forced. When people fear emptiness, they often fear the loss of personality. They think they will become blank or robotic. But what usually happens is the opposite. When you stop clinging to an image, your natural qualities appear more clearly. Your humor becomes more honest. Your kindness becomes less strategic. Your creativity becomes less afraid. Your presence becomes deeper. Emptiness reveals what is real by removing what is fabricated. A helpful way to understand this is to look at the way emotions operate. When you cling to emotions, you try to make them permanent, and you suffer. Emptiness reveals that emotions are not solid. They are waves. They rise, peak, and dissolve. Seeing this does not make you cold. It makes you less trapped. Another powerful part of emptiness is how it changes your relationship to pain. If the self is not a fixed object, then pain is not a permanent identity. Pain becomes an experience rather than a sentence. This is why many people find relief through emptiness. They stop saying, "I am broken," and start seeing there is pain happening. That one shift reduces suffering dramatically. Emptiness also breaks the habit of personalizing everything. When the self is not treated as the center of the universe, you stop interpreting every event as a comment on your worth. Someone's mood is not always about you. A setback is not always a cosmic punishment. A delay is not always proof of failure. Life becomes lighter because you are not carrying everything as mine. This is not detachment as coldness. It is detachment as clarity. The fear of emptiness also comes from the mind's addiction to stimulation. Constant noise can feel comforting because it prevents you from meeting yourself. But stimulation has a cost. It fragments attention. It prevents insight. It keeps you reactive. When you begin to reduce stimulation, you may feel restless at first because the mind is going through withdrawal. It reaches for the phone, the next video, the next conversation, the next problem to solve. If you stay with the restlessness, something changes. The mind settles. And in that settling, emptiness appears again, but now it feels less threatening. It starts to feel like a clean room, not a dark pit. A clean room allows you to see what matters. A cluttered room keeps you confused. Emptiness is the clean room of awareness. This is why meditation is central in Buddhist practice. It is not about becoming blank. It is about seeing clearly. When you sit and watch thoughts arise and pass, you realize how little control you have over mental events. Thoughts appear on their own. Feelings shift on their own. The self is revealed as a process, not a solid entity. That recognition can feel scary because it removes a false sense of control, but it also removes a false burden. You no longer have to micromanage your identity every moment. You no longer have to keep a strict narrative running to justify your existence. You can simply be. And simply being is more powerful than it sounds. Because it is the end of chasing. It is the end of proving. It is the end of holding everything too tightly. When emptiness is understood, compassion naturally grows. You see that everyone's identity is fragile. Everyone is clinging to something. Everyone is trying to feel safe. This understanding softens judgment. Instead of seeing people as enemies, you see them as beings navigating conditions they did not fully choose. This does not make you naive, it makes you human. Emptiness also increases courage. When you stop clinging to a fixed identity, you become less afraid of change. Failure does not destroy you because you are not a rigid structure. Criticism does not erase you because you are not a statue. You are a living process. You can adapt, learn, and evolve. This is the kind of freedom that changes life, not by giving you perfect circumstances, but by giving you a mind that is not trapped by circumstances. The path through fear of emptiness is not to force yourself into a spiritual idea. It is to meet the experience gradually. You notice the urge to fill space. You pause. You breathe. You allow a few seconds of silence, then a few more. You learn that nothing terrible happens when you do not immediately escape. You learn that the mind can be quiet without disappearing. Over time, you start to enjoy the spaciousness. It feels like relief. It feels like taking off a heavy bag you forgot you were carrying. The inner world becomes less crowded. Decisions become clearer. Emotional reactions become softer. You are less dragged around by thoughts. You begin to realize that what you feared as emptiness was actually openness, and openness is where life can move again. Because the stuck feeling often comes from rigidity, from gripping one identity, one plan, one story, one emotional state. Emptiness dissolves that rigidity, allowing movement. This is why emptiness is liberation. It does not take life away, it gives life back. As the fear of emptiness begins to soften, another hidden attachment quietly steps forward. The mind no longer panics at open space, but it still longs for something solid to lean on. Not a plan this time, not an identity, not a permanent emotion, but the approval that comes from being fully understood. The hope that somewhere, someone will finally see you exactly as you see yourself and confirm that you are not alone, not strange, not misplaced in this world. And when that understanding does not come, the old tension returns. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from feeling unseen, not rejected in an obvious way, but overlooked in a subtle way. Conversations happen, but something important remains unsaid. You explain yourself, but the meaning does not land. You show pieces of who you are, but people respond to a simplified version of you. Over time, this creates a quiet belief that life cannot truly move forward until someone finally understands. This belief becomes a waiting room. Waiting to be understood can feel noble, even necessary. It can seem like self-respect, like refusing to settle for shallow connections. But hidden inside that waiting is a trap. Life pauses while you search for the perfect listener, the perfect friend, the perfect partner, the perfect audience who will finally say, "I see you completely." Until then, something inside stays guarded, unfinished, suspended. In Buddhist thought, this attachment is another form of clinging to the self. Not clinging to identity in isolation, but clinging to the need for identity to be validated by others. The sense of self wants confirmation. It wants proof that it exists in the way it believes it does. Without that confirmation, insecurity grows. The problem is that no one can fully understand another human being. Each person experiences life through their own conditions, memories, fears, and interpretations. Even when someone listens deeply, they still translate what they hear through their own mind. Expecting perfect understanding is like expecting two mirrors to reflect the exact same angle of light. It is not how perception works. When you hold tightly to the need to be understood, you unknowingly hand over your sense of peace to other people's capacity. Your calm depends on their insight. Your confidence depends on their empathy. Your movement depends on their recognition. This makes life fragile because people are inconsistent, they are distracted, they are dealing with their own inner storms, so the waiting continues. Sometimes this attachment forms in childhood. A child tries to express pain, confusion, or uniqueness, but receives misunderstanding instead. Maybe the adults were busy, overwhelmed, or emotionally unavailable. The child learns that being understood is rare, something that must be chased. As an adult, the same pattern repeats. You over-explain. You rehearse conversations. You feel hurt when people do not grasp your intentions. You replay interactions, searching for what you could have said differently so they would finally see you. This mental replay becomes exhausting. It is another form of attachment to a story, except now the story depends on others completing it. Social media intensifies this pattern. People present curated versions of themselves and wait for reactions. Likes, comments, and shares become signals of being seen. When engagement is low, the mind interprets it as invisibility. When engagement is high, it feels like proof of existence. This creates a cycle where self-worth fluctuates based on attention. But attention is not understanding. Attention can be shallow, temporary, distracted. True understanding requires presence, and presence is rare in a world filled with noise. Another subtle effect of this attachment is self-censorship. When you crave understanding, you may adjust yourself to make it easier for others to grasp you. You simplify your thoughts. You hide complexity. You present only the parts that are acceptable. Over time, you drift further from your authentic experience, yet still feel misunderstood because the version of you that people see is incomplete. This deepens the frustration. You may begin to believe that you are fundamentally different from everyone else, that no one will ever truly connect with you. This belief isolates you further. You withdraw, but still hope someone will break through the walls you built. Buddhism points out that this suffering comes from treating the self as a fixed entity that must be mirrored back accurately. If the self is fluid, evolving, and conditioned by circumstances, then perfect understanding becomes unnecessary. You no longer need someone to confirm a stable identity because you recognize that identity itself is not fixed. Self-acceptance arises when you stop requiring external translation. This does not mean relationships become meaningless. It means they become freer. You share without demanding perfect comprehension. You listen without trying to capture every nuance. Communication becomes an exchange rather than a test. One reason waiting to be understood delays self-acceptance is that it creates a hidden condition. I will accept myself when others validate me. Until then, parts of you remain on trial. You analyze yourself through imagined judgments. You hesitate to act because you anticipate misinterpretation. You avoid risks because you fear being seen incorrectly. Life slows down. The Buddhist path encourages turning inward, not in isolation, but in direct awareness. You observe your thoughts, feelings, and reactions without needing to explain them to anyone. You begin to understand yourself from within, rather than through reflections in others. This internal clarity reduces the hunger for external confirmation. Silence becomes less threatening because you are not waiting for someone else to fill it with reassurance. Another important insight is recognizing that being misunderstood is not always a failure. It can simply be a difference in perspective. When you release the need to correct every misunderstanding, you save enormous energy. Not every narrative needs to be fixed. Not every assumption needs to be challenged. Sometimes letting people hold their incomplete version of you is an act of freedom. You become lighter. This also protects you from manipulation. People who sense your need to be understood can control you by offering selective validation. They give you just enough recognition to keep you attached. When your sense of self is stable internally, this tactic loses power. Self-acceptance does not come from isolation either. It grows from honest awareness. You acknowledge your strengths without exaggeration. You acknowledge your flaws without harshness. You stop waiting for permission to exist as you are. This does not prevent growth. It allows growth without self-rejection. The more you accept yourself, the less urgent the need to be understood becomes. Ironically, this often improves communication. When you are not desperate for validation, your words become clearer. Your presence becomes calmer. People feel less pressure and respond more openly. Authentic connection emerges naturally rather than through effort. Another layer of this attachment involves the fantasy of a perfect witness, someone who will hold all your experiences without distortion. This fantasy keeps you searching endlessly. You compare people against an ideal that does not exist. When they fall short, disappointment returns. Buddhism encourages letting go of idealization. Real people are imperfect. They misunderstand, forget, and interpret through their own lens. Accepting this does not diminish relationships, it makes them realistic. You appreciate moments of connection without demanding permanence. You also learn to be your own witness. You recognize your experiences as valid without external confirmation. This internal witnessing is deeply stabilizing. It reduces loneliness because you are not abandoning yourself while waiting for others. The path toward releasing this attachment includes practicing compassionate listening, not only toward others, but toward your own inner dialogue. When painful thoughts arise about being unseen, you notice them without amplifying them. You respond with patience rather than urgency. Gradually, the belief that understanding must come from outside weakens. You start to move forward even when people do not fully grasp your reasons. You pursue goals without waiting for universal approval. You express ideas without rehearsing every possible reaction. Life gains momentum because it is no longer paused for interpretation. Freedom from this attachment also transforms how you perceive rejection. Instead of seeing it as evidence that you are unworthy, you see it as a mismatch of perspective or timing. This reduces the sting. You recover faster. You remain open rather than defensive. In relationships, this creates healthier boundaries. You no longer overshare to force understanding, nor do you hide to avoid misunderstanding. You communicate honestly and accept that responses will vary. The deepest shift happens when you realize that being fully understood is not required for love, purpose, or peace. Many meaningful connections exist with partial understanding. People can care for you even if they do not grasp every detail of your inner world. Releasing the demand for perfect comprehension allows love to breathe. This realization is deeply relieving. It removes the pressure to perform your identity constantly. It allows you to change without announcing every transformation. It allows you to grow privately. As self-acceptance strengthens, a quiet confidence appears. Not arrogance, not indifference, but a steady sense that your existence does not need constant translation. You participate in life without waiting for a verdict. This confidence makes you more compassionate toward others as well. You recognize that they are also trying to be understood, also navigating misinterpretations, also carrying invisible stories. Instead of competing for recognition, you offer presence. Presence becomes the true form of understanding. It does not require perfect agreement. It only requires attention without judgment. When you practice this presence, both for yourself and others, the need to be understood transforms into the ability to understand. And in that shift, something profound happens. You stop chasing recognition and start experiencing connection directly. Life begins to move again, because it is no longer stuck behind the door of approval. You were never stuck because life forgot you. You were stuck because attachment quietly tightened around your thoughts, your fears, your identity, your need for certainty, control, validation, comfort, fairness, and recognition. Each attachment promised safety, but slowly turned into a cage. Buddhism does not say your life is broken, it says your grip is too tight. And the moment you loosen that grip, movement returns. Not because the world suddenly changes, but because you are no longer frozen inside it. Freedom was never somewhere far away. It was hidden behind every story you kept repeating, every version of yourself you refused to release, every past you replayed, every future you waited for before living. The path forward is not about becoming someone new. It is about seeing clearly, letting go gently, and stepping into the present without carrying everything that once defined you. If something inside you shifted while listening to this, write "I release" in the comments. That simple act turns awareness into action and marks the moment you stop holding on to what has been holding you back. If you want more teachings that calm the mind, sharpen awareness, and help you move through life with clarity instead of confusion, subscribe to the channel and join this journey. Because once you learn how attachment works, you don't just change your thoughts, you change your entire life.